Well, hello, everybody. Good evening and happy Tuesday story time. That's right, it's another Tuesday. It's another story time. It's more time for you and I to spend together again. I hope you guys are ready for a good old story time here with me as we continue Castle Roogna, Book 3 of the Xanth series. Should be exciting, spectacular, magnanimous, and just, as always, a whole bunch of fun. A bundle of laughs, a bundle of joy, and time for you and I to spend together again. So, let's talk a little bit about what we had from last week. So, last week, the book started. That's right. We started into Castle Roogna last week, and we met Dor. Dor is the son of Bink and Chameleon, a magician in his own right, and he got himself a little quest. Why did he get a quest? Well, why not? He is a magician, isn't he? Dor got himself a quest to basically be able to help out Millie and try to bring Jonathan the zombie back to life. Jonathan the zombie is the person that Millie would like to be with. Well, they find out that the only way to fulfill this need is for him to go back in time, essentially. 800 years. And the way to do this is by entering a tapestry that is in Castle Roogna, which displays, lo and behold, life from 800 years ago. So that's what they're doing. Dor goes to the good magician. He finds out that he needs to do these things. He gets some spells to go and do these things. And he is going to make his way back in time through this tapestry to go and find out how to do such a thing. And while he is there, the brain coral that you may remember from our last book, The Source of Magic, will actually be inhabiting his body to keep it alive while he is gone. And there we go. So it should be pretty interesting. As we jump into this, we'll be starting into chapter 3. And basically, Dor has just taken the spells and been sucked into the tapestry. Of course, as always, you can go and find any of these older chapters on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. Always a great way to pick up what I'm putting down and the things that I have already read. So everyone, sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we dive into Chapter 3 of Castle Roogna, Book 3 of the Xanth series. Chapter 3 Jumper Dor stood at bay, his trusty blade unmasked. The goblins in front of him faded back, afraid, before he could get a close look at them. He hadn't seen goblins in the flesh before. They were small, twisted, ugly creatures with disproportionately large heads and hands and feet. Goblins? Of course he hadn't seen them before. There had been few goblins on the surface of Xanth in daylight for centuries. They hid in the caverns beneath the surface, afraid of light. Oh, this was no longer the present. This was the tapestry, depicting the world of 800 years ago. So there could be goblins here, old ones, uncowed by light. But he himself, what of him? What body? Oh, yes, the huge, thewed, giant young man. Dor had never before experienced such ready power. The massive sword felt light in his hands, though he knew that in his real body he would barely have been able to swing it two-handed. This was the kind of body he had daydreamed about. Something stung him on the head. Dor clapped his hand there, knocking himself momentarily dizzy. But whatever it was gone. It had felt, however, like a louse or flea. He had no anti-fleas spell with him. Already the penalties of the primitive life were manifesting. The jungle was close. Giant-leaved branches formed a seemingly solid wall of green. There were fewer magic plants than he was used to. These more closely resembled mundane trees, which, again, made sense. The land of Xanth was closer to Mundania in nature than it would be in Dor's day. Evolution. The pedagogue centaur had taught him about that, how magic things evolved into more magical things to compete and survive better. Something entered the periphery of his vision as he looked around. Dor whirled and discovered that it had not been his sword that made the goblins retreat. Behind him stood a spider, the height of a man. Dor forgot all about the lurking goblins. He lifted the great sword, feeling the facility with which his body handled it. This was a trained warrior whose muscles had been augmented by experience and skill, which was fortunate because Dor himself was no swordsman. He could have sliced himself up if this body hadn't possessed good reflexes. The spider reacted similarly. It carried no sword, but hardly needed to. It had 8 hairy legs and 2 huge green eyes. No, 4 eyes, 2 large and 2 small. No, there were at least 6, scattered about its head. 2 sharp fangs projected inward from the mouth parts, and 2 mouth legs fitted outside. Overall, the creature was as horrible as Dor could imagine. Now it was preparing to pounce on him. On top of that, the thing was chittering at him, making a series of clicking sounds that could only be some kind of threat. Grundy the Golem could have translated it instantly, but Grundy was 800 years or so away now. The spider's 2 larger forelegs were raised. Though they had neither fingers nor claws, they looked formidable. And those mandibles behind them, those eyes. Dor made a feint with his sword, surprising himself. His body was bringing its own expertise into play. The monster drew back, clicking angrily. "What's that thing trying to say?" Dor asked himself nervously, not at all sure he could fend the monster off, despite his own greatly enhanced size and strength. The sword he held thought he had spoken to it. "I know battle language. The monster says he doesn't want to fight, but he's never seen a horror like you before. He wonders whether you are good to eat." "A horror like me?" Dor exclaimed incredulously. "Is the monster crazy?" "I can't be the judge of that," the sword said. I only understand battle competence. This creature seems distorted, but competent enough to me. For all I know, you could be the crazy one. I'm a 12-year-old boy from 800 years in the future, or from outside this tapestry, whichever makes more sense. Now my doubt has been allayed. You are indubitably crazy. Hell, you're in my hand now, Dor said, nettled. You'll do as I direct. By all means. Swords have ever been the best servants of crazy men. The monster spider had not actually attacked. Its attention seemed to be diverted. It was hard to tell what was the object of its diversion, because its eyes aimed in so many directions at once. Maybe it was only trying to understand his dialogue with the sword. Dor tried to spot what it was looking at, and saw the goblins returning. One thing about goblins, they were enemies. No one knew exactly what had happened to them, but it had been conjectured that they had been driven underground after centuries of warfare because of their implacable hatred of men. Once, legend claimed, the goblins had gotten along with man. Indeed, they were distantly related to men, but something had changed. This is no good, Dor said. If I fight the monster, the goblins will attack me from behind. But if I turn my back on the spider, it will eat me. Or something. So, slay the monster, then fight the goblins, the sword said. Die in honorable combat. It is the warrior's way. I'm no warrior, Dor cried, thoroughly frightened. It had not occurred to him that the world of the tapestry would pose an immediate threat to him. But now he was in it, this world seemed thoroughly real, and he didn't want to find out whether he could die here. Maybe his death would merely catapult him back prematurely, terminating the spell, dumping him into his own body, mission unaccomplished. Maybe it would be more final. You were a warrior until a few minutes ago, the sword said. A very stupid one, to be sure, to have gotten yourself trapped by this motley band of goblins, but nevertheless a warrior. Brains never were a requirement for war anyway. In fact, they tend to be a liability. Now, all of a sudden, you're timid as hell, and you're talking to me. You never did that before. It's my talent, talking to inanimate objects. That sounds like an insult, the sword said, glinting ominously. No, not at all, Dor said hastily. He certainly didn't need to have his own sword mad at him now. I am the only person privileged to talk to swords. All other people must talk to other people. Oh, it said, mollified. That is an unusual honor. How come you never did it before? Dor shrugged. He didn't want to go into the insanity bit again. Maybe I just didn't feel worthy. Must be, the sword agreed. Now, let's slay that monster. No. If it hasn't attacked by this time, I believe it when it says it doesn't want to fight. My father always says it's best to be friends if you can. He even made friends with a dragon once. You forget I was your father's sword before you inherited me. He never said anything of the kind. He said, Gorge, guzzle and wench, for tomorrow we get gutted. Then a wench's husband caught up with him while he was gorged and guzzled, and he got gutted. Mundanes were brutes. Dor had already known that. So this news about the family of this body was not all that shocking. Still, it was a lot more immediate than it had been. About making friends with a dragon. The word dragon may be taken as slang for an aggressive woman. The sword laughed. Oh, clever. And absolutely crazy. You're right. Your old man could have said it. Friends with a dragon. Dor decided to gamble. Though the sword could translate some of what the monster said into human language, it could not translate what Dor said into monster spider language, for that was not the sword's talent. It was one way. But communication should be possible, if he tried hard enough. I'm going to make a peace overture by gesture, he told the sword. A peace overture? Your father would roll over in his booze-sodden grave. You just translate what the spider says to me. I only understand combat language, not that sissy peace stuff, the sword said with warlike dignity. If the monster doesn't fight, I have no interest. Then I shall put you away. Dor looked for the scabbard. He touched his hip, but found no sheath there. Where do you go? The sword said something unintelligible. Where? Dor repeated, frowning. Into my scabbard, idiot, the sword said cuttingly. Where the hell is the scabbard? I can't find it. Don't you remember anything? It's across your big, stupid back, where it belongs. Dor felt his back with his left hand. There was a harness, with the scabbard angled from his right buttock to his left shoulder. He lifted the sword and maneuvered the point into the end of the sheath. Obviously, there was an art to this, and he lacked that art. Had he allowed his body to do it automatically, there would have been no problem. But now he was opposing the nature of his body, putting away his sword in the face of battle. Brother, the sword muttered with disgust. But when Dor relaxed, distracted by his own chain of thought, his body took over, and the sword slid into its scabbard and was fastened into place at last. Then you, scabbard, Dor said, you must understand peace, or at least truce. Yes, the scabbard replied. I comprehend the language of negotiation from strength, of peace with honor. Dor spread his arms wide before the monster spider, who had remained frozen in position all this time, while the goblins inched forward, suspecting a trap. Dor was trying to suggest peace. The monster spread its own front legs wide and chittered. Behind it the face of another goblin appeared, watching with suspicion. It seemed the goblins were not allied to the spider, and didn't understand it any better than Dor himself did. It says it was wondering when you would attack, the scabbard said. It thought for a moment you intended peace, but now you are making ready to grasp it with your pincers, so you can bite, or crush, or sting it to death. Hastily, Dor closed his arms. The spider chittered. Aha, the scabbard said. Now it knows it has outbluffed you. You are huddled in terror. It can consume you without resistance. Dor's embarrassment turned to anger. Now look here, monster, he snapped, shaking his left fist in the creature's hairy green face. I don't want to have to fight you, but if you force me... Another chitter. At last, the scabbard said, you have elected to meet it on equal terms, it says, neither threatening nor cowering. It is a stranger here, and is willing to declare a truce. Amazed and gratified, Dor held his pose. The spider brought its left foreleg forward. Still, Dor did not move, afraid that any change might be misinterpreted. Slowly the segmented leg came up until the mitten-like tip touched Dor's fist. Truce, the scabbard said. Truce, Dor agreed, relieved. The monster no longer looked so horrible. In fact, its green fur was handsome in its fashion, and the eyes gleamed like flawless jewels. The top of its abdomen was variegated, so that, seen from above, it might resemble a smiling human face. 2 round black fur eyes, a white fur mouth, a broad black fur mustache, and delicate green complexion. Maybe the face image was meant to frighten away predators, though what might predate on a spider this size, Dor hesitated to conjecture. The 8 legs were gray, tightened neatly into the base of the thorax. The 2 fangs were orange-brown, and long tufts of hair sprouted around some of the eyes. Really, quite a pretty creature, though formidable. Suddenly, the lurking goblins attacked in a swarm. Dor's body acted before he knew what it was doing. It whirled, drawing the sword from its sheath, and swung at the nearest enemy. "I thirst for your black blood, spawn of darkness," the sword cried in a happy sing-song. "Come, let me taste your foul flesh." The goblins were hardly daunted. 2 charged right at Dor. They were half Dor's height, and the outsized extremities made them look like cruel caricatures of the good magician Humphrey. But where the magician was grumpy, these were evil. There were incredible malignances in their misshapen faces. Their bodies were thin like the stalks of weeds and bumpy. They carried crude weapons, chips of stone, splinters of wood, and small thorny branches. "Stand back!" Dor cried, brandishing the hungry, thirsty sword. "I don't want to hurt you." But emotionally, he did want to hurt them. Antipathy flooded through him, for no good reason he could fathom. He merely hated goblins. Maybe it was inherent in being a man, this revulsion by the caricatures of man. Something completely alien could be tolerated, like the huge spider. But something that looked like a distorted man... Then he jumped. A 3rd goblin had sneaked in from the side and bitten him on the thigh. It hurt horribly. Dor punched him on the head with his left fist, and it hurt worse. The goblin's head was like a rock. Dor tried to grab an arm and haul the creature away, but it clung tenaciously, overbalancing him, still gnawing. Meanwhile, the other 2 were advancing, watching the gleaming blade with their beady eyes, trying to get safely around it. More goblins were crowding in behind. Then a hairy leg swung in. It inserted itself between the goblin and Dor's leg and thrust out. The goblin was ripped away, screaming with rage. Dor turned and stared into the nearest eye of the monster spider. He saw his own reflection in the green depth, a large, flat, bearded man's face, wholly unlike his real face, even after allowing for the distortion of the lens. Thanks," he said. Then both goblins at the front dived for him. Their little gnarly legs propelled them with surprising power, perhaps because their bodies were so small and light. They sailed right at his head. The body's mighty arm flexed. The sword whistled joyfully across in an arc, pointing outward. There was an awful double jerk, as of a stick banging through weeds, and the 2 goblins fell in 4 pieces. Had he done that? Dor stared at the dark red blood, seeing it turn black as it spilled out over the ground. Those goblins were thoroughly dead, and he was a killer. He felt nauseated. The spider chittered. Dor looked, and saw 4 goblins clinging to 4 of its legs, while others tried to reach its body. The spider was stretching its legs out, lifting its roughly globular body high to keep out of their reach, but was inevitably borne down by their weight. The underside was unprotected, Even small, sharp stones could puncture it quickly. Dor took his sword, pointing it at the nearest goblin, and thrust it violently forward. The sharp point transfixed a scrawny body and plunged it into the earth beside the spider's foot. Not that the spider had any foot in the usual sense. The final segment of its leg bulged slightly and rounded off toelessly. "Don't do that!" the sword cried. "Dirt dulls my edge." Dor jerked it out. The transfixed goblin came up with it. "Gah!" it cried, its eyes bulging, arms and legs kicking wildly. The little monster couldn't even die cleanly, but had to make it as grisly and awful as possible. Dor lifted one of his boots. He had not realized he was wearing them before, braced it against the goblin's contorted face, and shoved the creature off his sword. Blood squirted across the blade as the thing collapsed in a messy heap. Then Dor transfixed a second goblin, more carefully so as not to dull the edge of the blade, removing the remains more efficiently. Something in the back of his mind was throwing up, vomiting, puking out its guts, but Dor walled that off while he methodically did his job. The spider reached behind him with a long foreleg. A goblin screamed. It had almost reached Dor's back. Dor hardly reacted. He stabbed and cleared the third goblin, then the fourth. He was getting pretty good at this. Abruptly, the goblins were gone. A dozen of them lay dead on the ground. The rest had fled. Dor had killed 6, so the spider must have matched him kill for kill. They were a good fighting team. Now, in the aftermath, Dor suffered realization of what he had done. The back of his mind burst its retaining dam and washed forward with grisly abandon. Dor looked upon the carnage and spewed out the potato soup sandwich he had recently consumed. 800 years from now. At least it looked like potato soup, more than like goblin guts. He hardly cared. To kill humanoid creatures. The spider chittered. Dor needed no translation. "I'm not used to bloodshed," he said, suppressing another heave. "If only they hadn't attacked. I didn't want to do this." He felt tears sting his eyes. He had heard of girls being upset about losing their virginity. Now he had an inkling what it felt like. He had defended himself. He had had to do that, but in the process had lost something he knew he could never recover. He had shed humanoid blood. How could he ever get the taint from his soul? The spider seemed to understand. It moved to a dead goblin, held it with its palps, and sank its fangs into the body. But immediately it raised its head and spat out the goblin's blood. Again, Dor needed no translation. The goblin tasted awful. There was no way to undo what had been done, no way to reclaim his lost innocence. His body had fought in the manner it was accustomed to. As his revulsion abated, Dor realized that both he and the monster spider had had a narrow escape. Had they not been together and made their truce, had fought together, both would have fallen prey to the savage goblins. Why had the goblins attacked? Dor could find no reason except that he and the spider had been present and had seemed vulnerable. If goblins thought they could prevail, they attacked. It seemed to be that simple. Maybe they had been hungry, and Dor and the spider had seemed to be easier prey than whatever else offered. At any rate, it had been the goblins who started it, so Dor told himself he should not feel complete guilt. He had only done to the goblins what the goblins had tried to do to him. Still, there remained a grim pocket of negation in him, or horror at himself, at the capacity he had discovered in himself for slaughter, His new powerful body had been the mechanism, but the will had been his own. He could not blame that on anything else. If this was part of growing up, he didn't like it. He turned his attention to the spider. Was this creature native to this jungle? This seemed unlikely. The scabbard had said the spider was a stranger here, and it surely would not have fallen prey to goblins on the ground if it were familiar with this region. It would have been safe in its web, high in some tree. Dora had not seen any giant spiders illustrated in the tapestry, so yes, this could be a stranger, as he himself was. In any event, a useful ally, if he could only talk to it. Well, he could talk with it if he worked out a system. If he could find some object that understood spiders, not just war talk or negotiation from strength talk, some pebble on the ground where spiders foraged, perhaps, or... "That's it!" he cried. "What's it?" his sword replied, startled. "Are you going to clean me off now, so I won't rust?" Of course," Dor said, abashed. Swords in his own day all had anti-rust spells, but now he was amid primitive times. He wiped the blade carefully on the freshest grass he could find and sheathed it. Then he walked to the nearest tree and inspected its bark carefully. Meanwhile, the monster spider was cleaning its body, wiping the blood off its legs with its mouth parts, making itself look glossy clean again. One of its eyes, it turned out to have 8 of them, not 6, watched Dor. Since the eyes faced in each direction, it did not have to move its body at all to watch everything around it. But Dor was sure one of those eyes was assigned to him. "Aha!" Dor exclaimed. He had found a cobweb. "Are you addressing me?" the cob inquired. "I am indeed. You're from a spider, aren't you? You understand the language of spiders?" "I certainly do. I was fashioned by a lovely banded garden spider, the prettiest arachnid you never did see, all black and orange striped, with the longest legs. You should have seen her snare a mosquito. But a mean old gnatcatcher bird got her. I don't know why. It certainly wasn't out of gnats." "Yes, very sad," Dor agreed. "Now I'm going to take you with me. May I put you on my shoulder? I want you to translate some spider talk for me." "Well, my schedule is—" Dor poked a finger at it warningly. "Really quite flexible," the web concluded hastily. "In fact, I'm not doing anything at the moment. Do try not to mess up my pattern when you move me. My mistress put so much effort into—" Dor moved it carefully to his shoulder and fixed the pattern there, only messing up a few strands. Then he returned to the monster spider. "My, he's a big one," the web remarked. "I never realized that species grew quite so large." "Say something to me," Dor said to the spider. "I'll signal yes or no, some way you can understand." The spider chittered. "I wish I knew what you wanted, alien thing," the web translated. This was almost like having Grundy the Golem with him. But Grundy could translate both ways. Well, on with it. He was a human being, albeit a young and inexperienced one, and he should be able to work this out. Dor raised his fist in the spider's greeting among equals mode. Maybe he could let this indicate agreement, and the wide-open arms gesture the opposite. "You desire to renew the truce?" the spider inquired. "It doesn't really need renewal, but of course you are an alien creature, so you wouldn't know." Dor spread his arms. The spider drew back, alarmed. "You wish to terminate the truce? This isn't—" Confused, Dor dropped his arms. This wasn't working. How could he hold a dialogue if the spider interpreted everything strictly on its own terms? I wonder if something is wrong with you, the spider chittered. You fought well, but now you seem to be at a loss. You don't seem to be wounded. I saw you regurgitate the refuge from your last meal. Are you hungry again? How long has it been since you've eaten a really juicy fly? Dor spread his arms in negation, causing the spider to react again. It is almost as if you are in some fashion responding to what I am saying. Gladly, Dor raised his fist. Startled, the spider surveyed him with its biggest, greenest eye. You do understand? Dor raised his fist again. Let's verify this, the spider chittered, excited. It hadn't occurred to me that you might be sapient. Too much to expect, really, especially in a non-arachnid monster. Yet you did honor the covenant. Very well. If you comprehend what I am saying, raise your forelegs. Dor's arms shot up over his head. Fascinating, the spider chittered. I just may have discovered non-arachnid intelligence. Now lower one appendage. Dor dropped his left arm. It was working. The spider was establishing communication with a non-arachnid sapience. They proceeded from there. In the course of the next hour, Dor taught the spider, or the spider evoked from his subject, depending on viewpoint, the human words for yes, good, no, bad, danger, food, and rest. And Dor learned, or the spider taught, this. He was an adult, middle-aged male of his kind. His name was Phidippus variegatus, Jumper for short. He was a jumping spider of the family Saltaceae, the most handsome and sophisticated of the spider clans, though not the largest or most populous. Other clans no doubt had other opinions about appearance and sophistication, and had to be conceded. His kind neither lazed in webs, waiting for prey to fly in, nor lay in ambush, hoping to trap prey. His kind went out boldly by day, though he could see excellently by night, too, be it understood, stalking insects and capturing them with bold jumps. That was, after all, the most ethical mode. Jumper had been stalking a particularly luscious-looking fly perched on the tapestry wall, when something strange had happened, and he had found himself here. He had been too disoriented to jump, what with the presence of this, pardon the description, but candor becomes necessary, grotesque creature of 4 limbs, and the onslaught of the goblin bugs. But now Jumper was back in possession of his faculties, and seemed to have nowhere to go. This land was strange to him. The trees had shrunk. The creatures were horribly strange, and there seemed to be no others of his kind. How could he return home? Dor was able now to fathom what had happened, but lacked the means to convey it. The little spider had been walking on the tapestry when good magician Humphrey's yellow spell took hold, and the spell had carried him into the tapestry world along with Dor. Since the spider was peripheral, his transformation had only been partial, instead of becoming small in scale with the figures of the tapestry, and occupying the body of a tapestry spider. He had kept his original body, becoming only somewhat smaller than before. Thus, here in the tapestry, Jumper seemed like a man-sized giant. Dor, had he entered similarly, would have been the size of several mountains. The only way Jumper could return to his own world was by being with Dor when he returned. At least, so Dor conjectured. It might be that the spell would revert everything it had put into the tapestry when the time came, but that would be a gamble. So it was safest to stay together, returning more or less as a unit. Dor to his body and size, Jumper to the contemporary world. Dor could not make the details clear, since he hardly had them clear in his own mind. But the spider was no fool. Jumper agreed. They would stay together. Now both of them were hungry. The black flesh of the goblins was inedible, and Dor saw none of the familiar plants of his own time. No jelly barrel trees, flying fruits, water chestnuts, or pie fungi, and certainly no giant insects for Jumper to feed on. What were they to do? Then Dor had an idea. "Are there any bug-like forms around here?" he asked the web. "You know, the big six-legged creatures, segmented with feelers and pincers and things." "There are crabapple trees an hour's bird flight from here," the web said. "I have heard the birds squawking about getting pinched there." An hour's bird flight would mean perhaps 6 hours' travel by land. It depended on the bird and on the terrain. "Anything closer?" "I've seen some tree-dwelling lobsters right around here, but they have mean tempers." "That should be just the thing. I'd feel guilty about fingering sweet-tempered ones." Dor faced Jumper. "Food," he said, pointing to the nearest tree. Jumper brightened. It was not that his eyes glowed, but merely a heightening of posture. "I shall verify." He moved with surprising rapidity to the nearest trunk. Is it safe?" Dor asked the web. "Of course not. There are all manner of bug-eating birds up there, and maybe some bird-eating bugs." "Oh." Birds were deadly to spider-sized spiders. Jumper was something else. Still, best not to take chances. "Danger," Dor said. Jumper clicked his tusks together. "All life is a danger. Hunger is a danger, too. I am at home at the heights." And he continued climbing the tree with his marvelous facility, straight up the trunk. His 8 legs really helped. Dor had assumed that 2 or 4 legs were best, but already he was having second or fourth thoughts. He could not mount a tree like that. In a moment, Jumper's worried chitter percolated down through the foliage. "Unless there are praying mantises up here." "What's a praying what's-it?" Dor asked the web quietly. "That's Pray, not Prey. The mantises pray for prey." "All right. What is it?" "A bug-eating bug. Bigger than almost any spider." Just so. "None your size," Dor called up, hoping Jumper understood. Then he waited at the base, nervously. No mantises, surely, but wouldn't a steam dragon be as bad? His acquaintance with the big spider was recent, but he felt a certain responsibility for Jumper. It was Dor's fault Jumper was in this predicament, after all. And yet, if Jumper hadn't been brought along in the eddy current of the spell, what would have happened to Dor himself, thrown innocent into the pack of goblins? The two of them together had overcome the menace, while Dor alone would have... He shuddered to think of it. He owed Jumper a considerable debt already, and his adventure in the tapestry had just begun. Something loomed at his face. Dor ducked, alarmed, fingers scrabbling at his hip for his sword, and of course not finding it there. Then he saw that the looming thing was a tree lobster, descending on a thread. Except that lobsters don't use threads. No, this one was tightly bound, helpless, its leaf-green claws tied closely to its bark-brown body, swinging head down, a captive of the big spider. Almost, Dor felt sympathy for the lobster, for it was still alive and struggling vainly against its web bands. But he remembered the time he had climbed a butternut tree to fetch some butter, and a lobster had nipped him. He'd been nervous about them ever since. They were ornery creatures. This one's red antennae radiated malevolence at him. Another bound lobster was lowered to hang a few feet above the ground, and then a third. Then Jumper himself floated down. I ate the rest, he cluttered. Less juicy than flies, but none the less excellent. These ones I shall save for future repasts. My gratitude to you for your timely information, Doorman. Yes, Door said, using the best word he had to indicate a positive response directly. He was glad that he had been able to help, but it was not enough. His responsibility would not be through until he had returned Jumper to his own world. Now it was Door's turn to look for food. He asked the web, but it had mainly seen things that moved, while Door preferred sedentary food. So he inquired of stones he saw, and sticks of wood, and soon located a hominy tree with a few ripe grits on it. This wasn't much, but it would hold him for a while. The magic vegetation did exist. It was merely sparser, more secretive than in his own day, forcing him to search it out more carefully. By this time it was late afternoon. It would not be safe to spend the night on the ground. More goblins could come, or other threats could manifest. If this were Door's own world, there would have been a half-dozen bad threats already, as well as several nuisances and a couple of annoyances. But maybe the goblin band had cleaned out the local monsters, not liking the competition. Rest, Door said, pointing to the declining sun. Jumper understood. I can see very well in the dark, but it may be unsafe for Doorman. The trees are not safe either. There are other things than birds up there that I perceived a moment ago. One resembled a bird, but had a man face and a bad odor. A harpy, Door cried. Face and bosom of a woman, body of a bird. They're awful. Of course, he knew Jumper couldn't follow all that, but he would pick up on the tone of agreement. Therefore, we should sleep in the air, Jumper concluded. I will string you from a branch, and you will swing safe for the night. Door was not sanguine about this notion either, but could neither express his objection adequately nor offer a better alternative. To be trussed up like one of those living lobsters. With misgivings that he trusted were not evident to the spider, Door suffered himself to be looped by several strands of line. Jumper drew the material from his spinnerets, which were organs in his posterior. He cheerfully explained it in more detail than Door cared to know as he proceeded. My silk is a liquid that hardens into a strong thread as it is drawn out. With my 6 spinnerets, I shape it into strands of whatever texture, strength, and quality I happen to require. In this case, I'm using a single threads for the hammock and a multi-strand cable for the main line. Now, you wait here for a moment while I make the connection. There wasn't much else Door could do at this stage except wait as requested. That silk was strong stuff. Jumper climbed up through the air. Noting Door's startled reaction, he chittered down the explanation. My dragline. I left it in place when I finished catching the lobsters. We spiders could not survive without our draglines. They keep us from falling, ever. Sometimes my hatchmates and I would have drag races, when I was young, jumping from high places to see who could bounce closest to the ground without touching. He climbed on out of sight. Hatchmates? Door inquired, mainly to keep the spider chittering so he would know where he was. My siblings who hatched from the egg sac, Jumper responded from above. Several hundred of us, shedding our first skins and emerging into the great outer world to disperse and fend for ourselves. Is this not the case with your kind, too? No, Dor admitted. I am the only one in my family. My consolations. Did some monster consume all the rest before they could escape? Not exactly. My parents take good care of me when they are home. Your sire and siress remain together? I fear I misunderstand your expression. Well. Intriguing notion. Maintaining a relationship with one's mate and offspring after procreation. Perhaps I should check with my mate when I return, just to see how she's managing with the egg sac. Wouldn't want my spiderlings to hatch prematurely. Then, abruptly, Dor was hoisted off the ground. Jumper was hauling him into the air like a lobster. Yet it was oddly comfortable. Jumper had not bound him, but had placed his strands competently so that Dor was well supported without being confined. Most of the lines were invisible, unless he knew exactly where to look. The spider was really expert at this sort of thing. It was easy to relax in this hammock, to rest, and he did feel safe. In a moment, Jumper glided down to hang beside him. They dangled together as the serenity of the night closed in above them, secure from the threats of ground and tree. Dor jumped. He scratched his head. Something scuttled away through his hair. It was that flea again. Probably the same one who had bitten him when he first arrived. He thought of mentioning it to the spider, who should certainly know how to catch a flea, but then worried that he might lose an ear in the process. Those tusks of Jumper's were fierce. This was one problem he preferred to handle himself. Next time that critter bit him. Dor woke as the light filtered in through the branches. He felt some discomfort, for he was not used to sleeping in a vertical position, but he knew he was better off than he might have been. His leg was sore where the goblin had bitten it, and his right arm was stiff from swinging the heavy sword, and his stomach rumbled with borderline dissatisfaction. But this was a well-conditioned body. The sensations were mere annoyances. Jumper stirred. He dropped to the ground to make sure it was safe, then climbed back up to lower Dor. As Dor's foot touched the forest floor, the big spider moved his legs dexterously around him, and the net of web fell away. Dor was free. Now, suddenly, he felt an urgent call of nature. He retreated to a bush to take care of it. Floating in air was nice, but was limiting in certain ways. He wondered whether real heroes were ever embarrassed by such problems. Certainly the subject never came up in the heroic tales of this period. Jumper chittered as Dor returned. Dor listened, but could make no sense of it. What had happened to his translator? After a moment, he found out. The big spider had removed it when he cut away the net web. It was a natural error. Dor found a strand of Jumper's own leftover silk and put that on his shoulder. Translate, he ordered it. Mission. Well, mine is merely to return to my normal world, Jumper was saying. So it behooves me to help you complete your mission, so that we can both return. Yes, Dor agreed. Obviously, magic is involved. Some spell has carried me to your world, except that you do not seem overly familiar with it yourself, so it must be a strange aspect of your world. You are here to accomplish something, after which you will be released from your enchantment. So if we stay together... Yes, Dor agreed. Jumper was one smart arachnid. He must have thought things out during the night, recognizing the seeming change in his size and Dor's ignorance of these surroundings as linked things. So the best thing to do is to get your job done as fast as possible, Jumper concluded. If you will indicate where you need to travel.
To the zombie master,
Dor said, but of course that wasn't clear. Also, he had no idea where to find the zombie master. This led to a somewhat confused discussion. Finally, Dor asked some of the local artifacts. They knew nothing of the zombie master, but had heard of King Roogna. It seemed a detachment of the king's army had passed this way.
King Roogna, of course, Dor exclaimed. He would know. He would know everything. I should talk to him first, and he will tell me how to find the zombie master.
Thus it was decided. Dor got general directions from the landscape, and they began their trek toward Castle Roogna. In one part of his mind, Dor remained bemused by the fact that this was the tapestry world, and the entire tapestry was inside Castle Roogna. Yet they evidently faced a journey of many days to reach the castle. It did make sense, somehow, he was sure. As much sense as magic ever did. He was getting used to this new jungle. Rather, this old jungle. Many of the trees were giant, with voluminously proliferating foliage, but had very little magic. It was as if it took longer for magic to infuse the vegetation than the animals. Sweat gnats were present, and bluebottle flies, their bottle bodies refracting the beams of sunlight they buzzed through. But even these minor insects did not approach Jumper too closely. This was one advantage of traveling with a spider.
No!
Dor cried suddenly.
Danger!
He pointed.
You're walking into a tangled tree.
Jumper paused. I gather there is some threat. All I see is the collection of vines. In the spider's normal, small world, there would be no tangled trees, Dor realized. Tanglers were there, to be sure, but they would hardly bother anything as small as a spider. Also, Jumper might have lived all his life in the tapestry room of Castle Roogna, so never encountered any of the jungle threats, regardless of relative sizes. Yet he seemed familiar with trees in general, so he must have spent some time outside.
I'll show you,
Dor said. He picked up a large stick and heaved it at the tree. The Tangler's tentacles snatched it out of the air and tore it to splinters. I see what you mean, Jumper said appreciatively. I believe I walked on the foliage of such a tree once in my youth, but it paid me no attention. Now that I am on its scale, it is another condition. I am glad I am keeping your company, weird though your form is. Which was a decent compliment. Dor inspected the Tangler from a safe distance. He had identified it almost too late, because it was of a different subspecies from the ones he had known. It was cruder, more like a mundane tree, with light bark on the tentacles, and it lacked the pleasant greensward and sweet perfume beneath. Tanglers had grown more sophisticated over the centuries as their prey became more wary. For a person attuned to the end product, the cruder ancestral version was hard to identify. He would have to be more careful. There was less magic in the jungle, but what there was just as dangerous to him and Jumper. They resumed their journey. The land of Xanth was a peninsula connected to Mundania by a narrow mountainous isthmus at the northwest extremity. Dor's body appeared to be that of a mundane who had recently crossed the isthmus. Maybe that was why he had been easy for the goblins to trap. It took time to appreciate all the hazards of Xanth, and even a lifetime did not suffice for some people. A mundane would have all the wrong reflexes and perish quickly, which perhaps was why the mundanes invaded in waves. There was security in great numbers. Now they were proceeding toward the center of Xanth, Castle Roogna, in a southerly direction. How they would cross the gap that cut Xanth in two, Dor wasn't certain. In his day, the northern wilderness was not as dangerous as the southern wilderness, and since there was less magic now, or rather less developed magic, Dor did not anticipate too much trouble this side of the gap. But the land of Xanth had a way of fooling people, so he remained on guard. Castle Roogna. He wondered whether there was a tapestry on its wall depicting what? The events another 800 years past? Or the present, including himself coming toward the castle? Intriguing thought. Jumper paused, raising his two foremost forelegs, which seemed to be the most sensitive to new things. Dor had noted no ears on the spider. Was it possible he heard with his legs? Something strange, Jumper chittered. The spider had grown accustomed to the routine strangeness of this land, so this must be something special. Dor looked. Before them stood a creature vaguely like a small dragon, yet obviously not a dragon, yet with dragon affinities. It had an irregularly sinuous body, small wings that did not seem functional, claws, tail, and a lizard head, but lacked the formidable teeth and fire of a true dragon. In fact, it did not look very formidable.
I think it will be safe to circle around it,
Dor said. There was a swampy region to the west with malodorous bubbles, and a thicket of glistening brambles to the east, so it was necessary to pass through this creature's territory.
We're not looking for trouble, and maybe it isn't either.
Knowing Jumper could hardly understand all that discussion, he set the example by detouring right, to circle the monster at a safe distance without going too near the bubbly swamp. But the creature extended one leg enormously, so that it stretched way out to block Dor's progress.
"You may not pass," it rasped. "This is my domain, my precinct, my territory. I govern."
At least it talked.
We do not seek any quarrel with you,
Dor said, remembering adult protocol for such things.
If you let us pass, we will not bother you.
"If you pass, you prevail," the monster said. "I am Gerrymander. I prevail by whatever devious configuration."
Dor knew of no such creature in his own time. This must have been an evolutionary dead end. Gerrymander, who prevailed by changing its shape to block the passage of others. A strange definition of success.
I do not wish to damage you, Gerrymander,
Dor said, placing his hand on the hilt of his sword. He feared it looked as if he were scratching his shoulder, and wished this body had a more conventional harness for the sword. But that couldn't be helped.
But we must pass.
Gerrymander's shape settled grotesquely. It contracted along its extremity and stood in its original form before Dor.
"You shall not. I hold this office eternally, regardless of the need or merit of others."
The thing was meeting his challenge squarely. Dor was daunted. He was using the body of a powerfully grown man, but he remained a boy at heart, and he never had been much for combat. Those goblins? The horrible way they had died? No, not that again.
Then I'll just have to go around another way.
He backed off.
"You shall not,"
Gerrymander repeated.
"No one supersedes me by fair means."
Its neck extended in a series of odd jumps until its head came to rest behind Dor. Now he was half encircled. Sudden fear prompted him to do what determination had not. Dor drew his sword with the practiced speed of his warrior body and pointed it directly at the creature's heart region.
Get out of my way!
For answer, the thing's left wing began extending with the same chunky jerks, forming a misshapen barrier around Dor's other side.
I am surrounding you, isolating your influence,
Gerrymander said.
You have no power. Your grassroots are shriveling. Your aspirations fading away. Your strength will be mine.
And Dor did feel a sinister weakening, as if his body were being drained of some vital imperative. Terrified by this strange threat, he reacted savagely. He struck with all his power at the thing's neck. The great sword cut cleanly through Gerrymander's substance as if it were mere cocoa from a nut, cleaving the monster in twain. But no blood flowed.
I don't have to be contiguous,
Gerrymander cried, its severed head forming little legs as its ears elongated. The ears were now limbs.
I don't have to be reasonable. I have the power of accommodation. I can be any shape, any number, any time. I am master of form and number. I cover whatever territory I need, regardless of my actual base, to hold power.
Dor struck again, separating a section of body, but the thing did not die or yield. Dor cut it into half a dozen bloodless segments, yet they maintained their formation about him. An arm coalesced into a torso, the fingers of its hands stretching into separate arms and legs. A leg sprouted legs and a tail. The original tail grew a head.
I convolute, I divide, I conquer,
the original head cried as the segments closed in.
Help! Jumper!
Dor cried, entirely unnerved.
I am here, friend,
the spider chittered.
Sheathe your blade, lest you injure me, and I will aid you.
Dor obeyed. His body was shaking with fear and humiliation. Whatever had given him the notion that all he needed to be a hero was a hero's body? Jumper bounded phenomenally, passing right over Gerrymander and landing beside Dor. I will tie this creature, the spider chittered. I will bind it together so that it cannot move. Jumper rapidly drew yards of silk from his versatile spinnerets. He looped his line about Gerrymander's tail section, anchoring it in several places with sticky lumps. Then he looped another segment and drew the two together, making a package. Working rapidly with his 8 legs and with marvelous dexterity, he looped more segments and drew them in tight. He was forcing Gerrymander to collect back into its original volume. As the segments came together, they merged, forming one creature. The superfluous arms, legs, heads, and tails flowed back into the main mass. Gerrymander was being put back together. But this wasn't enough.
I surround, I select, I conquer,
the monster cried, its tail re-expanding to fill the space it had occupied as a separate segment. Jumper's strands could not prevent this. They remained in place, anchoring the creature, but could not stop its projection from growing around and between them. All the spider had accomplished was the undoing of Dor's slicing. The monster's basic talent was not affected. I fear that I, like you,
and being overcome, Jumper chittered. Come, friend, let us retreat and reconsider.
He flung a loop around Door, then leaped straight up 30 feet to cling to the overhanging branch of a mundane tree. Then he hauled on his line and drew Door slowly up after him. Gerrymander gave a shriek of pure anguish.
Ah, they escape me!
It tried to catch Door's rising legs. Door yanked his feet out of the thing's grasp. The creature extended itself, rising high to pace him, and grabbed again. Door drew his sword and slashed at the grotesquely reaching hand limb. Gerrymander's catching claw was cut off, and it fell to the ground, where it quickly merged with the rest of the body. The thing might not be hurt by having chunks of itself cut off, but it was unable to lift such pieces very high into the air without support.
Ah!
It cried despairingly.
I have been outmaneuvered.
We had only to jump over it,
Door realized with realization.
Just as it blocked us, knowing no laws of motion, we could pass it without such laws. The moment we pass it, we win. That's how you fight Gerrymander.
Indeed, the defeated monster was rapidly dwindling into its smaller original form. Its power existed only so long as it was matching its challenge, according to its definition.
Strange are the ways of this world,
Jumper chittered. Door only shook his head, agreeing. Jumper lowered Door down beyond Gerrymander, and the two resumed their trek. Now Door knew how the spider got his name. He had never before seen such jumping ability. He had thought all spiders made webs, but Jumper didn't, though he certainly had facility with silk. It was, Door realized, not safe to categorize creatures too blithely. There were enormous variations. They were becoming wise to the ways of this region and traveled rapidly. Most wild creatures were wary of Jumper, who looked more ferocious than he was, and seemed quite alien to this world, which he was not. He was merely large for his type. By nightfall, they had traversed most of northern Xanth, Door judged. They might have traveled faster, but had had to stop to forage for food every so often. He remembered that there was supposed to be a grove of peace trees in this vicinity. Not a good place to sleep, for the sleeper might never find the initiative to wake again. So at his behest, they camped just shy of the main forest, suspended from a solitary crabapple tree in a field. A stream nearby provided water for Door, and the crabs from the tree were a minor feast for Jumper. Next morning they passed hastily through the peace grove, never stopping to rest. Door felt lethargy overwhelming him, but these trees, too, had not developed their magic to its potency of later centuries, and he was able to fight it off. Jumper, unused to this effect, became sluggish, but Door goaded him on until they were out of the grove. At last they stood at the brink of the gap, 1,000 paces across here, and just as deep. It was Xanth's most scenic and devastating landmark.
It doesn't appear on any maps of my day, Door said, because there is some kind of forget spell associated with it. But most of us at Castle Roogna have become more or less immune to the effect, so we remember. I don't know how we can get across except by climbing down this wall and up the other. You could do that readily, I'm sure, but I'm not nearly as good a climber as you are, and I get nervous about heights.
They had conversed during their trek, and Jumper was already picking up a small, versatile vocabulary of Door's words. He could now make out the general gist of Door's speech.
I believe we can cross this if we must, he chittered. There is, however, a certain element of risk.
Yes, the Gap Dragon, Dor said, remembering.
Danger?
Big danger. At the bottom of the chasm. Dragon. Like gerrymander. Only worse. Teeth.
We can jump over it?
The dragon would. The teeth. It's just not safe,
Dor said, frustrated. He could not remember whether the Gap Dragon was a fire breather or a steamer, but wouldn't want to risk it either way. Nobody in his right mind, and not too many in their wrong minds, messed with a full-size dragon.
However, we do not need to descend, Jumper chittered. I contemplate ballooning.
Ballooning?
Floating across the chasm on an airborne line. There is an updraft here. I believe conditions are favorable. In the height of the day when the warm air rises, but there remain risks.
Risks? Dor repeated, stunned by the whole notion. Flying? On silk?
If the air current should change, or a storm arise.
The more Dor thought about it, the less he liked it. Yet his other options did not seem better. He did not want to go down into the gap, or to try to walk all the way around it. He had a couple of weeks here in the tapestry to complete his mission, and had used 2 days already. Going all the way around the gap could use all the rest. He needed to get to Castle Roogna as rapidly as possible.
I guess we'd better balloon, he said reluctantly.
Jumper stood at the edge of the gap and drew out some silk. Instead of attaching it to anything, he let the wind take it. Soon it was unreeling rapidly, the end of the silk being drawn upward like a magic kite. Dor could only see a few feet of it. Beyond that, the silk became invisible in the distance, no matter how carefully he traced it. He did not see how this could carry anything across the chasm.
It is almost ready, Jumper chittered. Let me fasten it to you, friend, before it hauls me away.
Indeed, the huge spider was now clinging to the ground. There was evidently quite a strong pull from that invisible thread.
Please, approach.
Dor stepped close, and with deft motions of his forelegs, the spider fashioned a hammock to support him. Then an extra gust of wind came, and Dor was hauled into the air and out over the gap. Too startled to move or scream, Dor stared down into the awesome depths. He swung down on the end of his tether as his kite achieved its special orientation. He thought he would sink right down into the chasm, but then the updraft caught hold strongly and carried him upward. The walls of the chasm angled down on either side to form a wedge-like base. The sunlight angled down from the east, making stark shadows in the irregularities of the cliff. Even so, the depths remained gloomy. No, he didn't want to go down there. As he rose back above the rim of the canyon, the wind eased. It lifted him slowly, but also carried him westward along the chasm. He was not really getting across. Jumper remained on the rim, spinning a balloon line for himself, but this took time, and the distance between them was extending alarmingly. Suppose they got completely separated. Dor had known Jumper only 2 days, but he had come to depend on the big spider. It was not merely that Jumper was company, or that he fought well, or that he had so many useful tricks with his silk, such as ballooning. It was that Jumper was an adult. Dor had the body of a man, but fell far short of the judgment or certainty of a man. He got frightened when alone, and insecure, not always for sufficient reason. Jumper, in contrast, coolly assessed every situation and reacted with level-minded precision. He could make mistakes, but they didn't throw him. He was a stabilizing influence, and Dor needed that. He hadn't realized it until this moment, which was part of his problem. He was not good at analyzing his own motives ahead of a crisis. He needed the company of someone who understood him, someone who could prepare for Dor's mistakes without making an embarrassing issue of it. Someone like Jumper. There was a pain in his scalp. Dor swatted at it. Damn that flea. The wind was, if anything, picking up now. Dor sailed faster and higher. His apprehension mounted. It hardly seemed he was going to come down anywhere, certainly not the far side of the gap. He might be blown all the way out to sea and drown, or be consumed by sea monsters. Or he might float higher and higher until he starved. Worst of all, he might even land in Mundania. Why hadn't Jumper anticipated this? The answer was, he had. The spider had warned of the risk, and Dor had decided to take that risk. Now he was paying the price of that decision. A speck appeared among the clouds. A bug. No, a bird. No, a harpy. No, a dragon. No, it loomed larger still. A rock. It must be a rock bird, largest of all winged creatures. But as it came closer yet, and he gained perspective on it, he knew that it was, after all, too small to be a rock, though it certainly was large. It was a bird with bright but tasteless plumage, patches of red, blue, and yellow on the wings, a brown tail speckled with white, and a body streaked in shades of green. The head was black, with a white patch about one eye and two purple feathers near the gray beak. In short, a hodgepodge. The bird loomed closer, cocking one eye at Dor. This was another danger he hadn't thought of. Attack by a flying creature. He grabbed for his sword, but restrained himself, afraid he would cut through his silken line and plummet into the chasm. He had been lucky he didn't sever his line when he was escaping from Gerrymander. But that had been a far lesser height than this. Yet if he didn't defend himself, the bird might eat him. It did not look like a predator. The beak was wrong. More like a scavenger. But the way it peered at him... "Hoorah!" the bird cried. It dived forward, extended its big hand-like feet, and snatched Dor out of the air. "Hoorah! Hoorah!" And it stroked powerfully south, carrying Dor along. This was the direction he had wanted to go, but not the manner. Prey for a monstrous, loud-beaked bird. Now he was glad Jumper wasn't with him, for the spider could not have helped him against so large a creature, and would only have fallen prey too. A big bird would be the worst possible menace to a big spider. Now that his fate was upon him, Dor found himself much less afraid than he had thought he ought to be. Here he was going to be cruelly consumed, but most of what he felt was relief that his friend had escaped that destiny. Was this a sign he was growing up? Too bad he would never have the chance to complete the process. Of course, Jumper would be stuck in the tapestry world, without Dor's spell to release him from it, unless the spell automatically reverted whatever didn't belong here, such as one live spider and the digested refuse of... Still, it wasn't his own body getting eaten. Maybe a compromise. His spirit, halfway dead, so he would return as a zombie. He could wander about the dismal countryside, swapping ghoul stories with Jonathan. Yuck. "Hoorah!" the bird cried again, descending toward a huge, spreading, mundane-type tree. In a moment it landed on a tremendous nest, depositing Dor in its center. The nest was incredible. It had been fashioned from every imaginable and some unimaginable substance. String, leaves, bark, snakeskins, seaweed, human clothes, feathers, silver wire. Dor's father had mentioned a silver oak somewhere in the jungle. The bird must have found that tree. Dragon scales, a petrified peanut butter sandwich, strands of hair from a harpy's tail. Harpies had hairy feathers, or feathery hairs. A tangle tree tentacle, pieces of broken glass, seashells strung together, an amulet fashioned from centaur mane, several dried worms, and a mishmash of less identifiable things. But what filled the nest was even more remarkable. There were eggs, of course, but not this bird's own eggs, for they were of all colors, sizes, and shapes. Round eggs, oblong eggs, hourglass eggs, green ones, purple ones, polka-dotted ones, an egg the size of Dor's head, and another the size of his littlest fingernail. At least one was an alabaster darning egg. There were also assorted nuts, berries, and screws. There were dead fish and live wires and golden keys and brass-bound books and pine and ice cream cones. There was a marble statue of a winged horse and marbles carved from unicorn horn. There was an hourglass with a quarter hour on it and 3 linked rings made of ice, a soiled sunbeam and a polished werewolf dropping, 5 goofballs, and Dor.
Hoorah!
The bird cried exultantly, flapping its wings so that the papers, leaves, and feathers flew about in a miniature windstorm within the nest. Then it took off. It seemed this bird liked to collect things. Dor had become part of the collection. Was he the first man so collected, since he saw no other here? Or had the others been eaten? No, he saw no human bones. Not that that proved anything. The bird could digest the bones along with the flesh. Probably he had become collect-worthy because he had seemed to be a flying man, an unusual species. Dor made his way past the bric-a-brac to the nearest rim of the nest so that he could peer over. But all he could see were layers of leaves. He was sure he was far up in the tree, however. It would be suicidal to jump. Could he climb down? The limb of the tree on which the nest perched was round, smooth-barked, and moist. Only the fact that it branched at the base of the nest made it possible for anything to remain on top of it. Dor was almost certain he would fall off. He simply was not a good climber. He knew he should make a decision soon, and take action before the hoorah bird returned. But he found himself paralyzed with objections to any positive course. To jump was to fall and die. To climb was to fall and die. To remain here was to be eaten?
I don't know what to do,
he cried, near tears.
That's easy, the unicorn statue said. Make a rope from fragments of the hoorah's nest and let yourself down to the ground. Not from my substance, the nest protested.
Dor took hold of a piece of cord and yanked it out of the nest. It snapped readily. He drew on some long straw with similar result. He tried for some cloth. It too lacked cohesion. He took hold of the silver wire, but it was so fine it cut into his hands.
You're right, Nest, he said. Not from your substance.
He looked about, however, taking some faint heart.
Any other notion? Things?
I am a magic ring,
a golden circlet said.
Put me on and make a wish. Any wish. Any wish at all. I am all-powerful.
Then how had it ended up here? But he couldn't afford to be too choosy. Dor put it on his little finger.
I wish I were safe on the ground.
Nothing happened.
The ring is a liar,
the werewolf dropping growled.
I am not, the ring cried. It just takes a little time. Have patience, a little faith in me. I'm out of practice, that's all.
Its statement was greeted by a rumble of derisive laughter from many other artifacts of the Hoorah's nest. Dor cleared junk from one area and lay down, trying to think of something, but his mind would not perform. Then a hairy leg came up over the rim of the nest, followed by another, and a pair of huge green eyes, plus a collection of smaller black eyes.
Jumper!
Dor cried, delighted.
How did you find me?
I never needed to search for you, the spider chittered, falling its pretty abdomen over the brim. That variegated fur face never looked so good. As a matter of routine, I attached a dragline to you. When the Hoorah took you, I was carried along behind, though at a fair distance. I dare say I was virtually invisible. I did get hung up on the tree, but once I climbed the line to its end, I found you.
That's great. I was afraid I'd never see you again.
You forget, I need your magic to escape this world. Actually, their dialogue was not nearly this concise, because Jumper still did not know many human words, but it seemed like normal conversation in retrospect. Now, shall we depart?
Yes.
Jumper attached a new line to Dor and made ready to lower him down through the foliage. But just then they heard the beat of huge wings. The Hoorah was returning. Jumper sprang out of the nest and disappeared below. Dor, alarmed, remembered almost immediately that no spider ever fell. His dragline protected him. Dor might have jumped similarly, but wasn't sure his own dragline was properly anchored. The Hoorah's approach had become audible just when Jumper was seen to it, interrupting the process. Or maybe, Dor reminded himself savagely, he was simply too scared to do what he had to do in time. The Hoorah's mishmash plumage appeared. It covered the nest. Something dropped.
Hoorah!
Then the bird was off again on its insatiable mission of collection. The thing most recently deposited stirred. It flung limbs about and a curtain of hair. It righted itself and sat up. Dor stared. It was a woman. A young, pretty, girl-type maiden. And that is the end of Chapter 3. Well, that came about abruptly. Even reading quickly on these chapters are long. Gotta love it. What do you guys think about Castle Roogna so far? Interesting? Not so interesting? Enjoyable? Not so enjoyable? Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Almond Joy's got nuts, Mounds don't. Ugh. Ugh. Oh well. Here we go. Boogada, boogada. There we go. Boogada, boogada. Give my voice just a moment to rest, and then we'll start into the next chapter. This is what I need. I need a cough drop. I think that's what it is. Lemon mint Ricola cough drops. They're fantastic. At least I enjoy them. All right. Here we go. Let's get into Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Monsters. As the big bird disappeared, Jumper climbed back over the side of the nest. The girl spied him and screamed. She flung her hair about. She kicked her feet. She was a healthy young thing with a penetrating scream, marvelous blonde tresses, and extremely well-formed legs.
It's all right,
Dora cried, not certain whether he was thinking more of the situation, which was hardly all right, or of her exposed legs, which were more than all right. This body really noticed such things.
He's a friend. Don't bring back the hoorah.
The maiden's head snapped about to face him. She seemed almost as alarmed by Dor as by the huge spider. "Who are you? How do you know?"
I'm Dor, he said simply.
Maybe one year he would learn to introduce himself to a lady with flair.
The spider's my companion.
Distrustfully, she watched Jumper. "Ooh, ugly. I've never seen a monster like that before. I think I'd rather be eaten by the bird. At least it's familiar."
Jumper's not ugly. He doesn't eat people. They don't taste good.
She whirled to face him again, and once more her golden hair flung out in a spiral swirl. She looked suddenly familiar, but he was sure he had not seen her before. He had encountered no girls here in the past. How does he know?
We were attacked by a band of goblins. He tasted one.
Goblins? They aren't real people. Of course they taste bad.
How do you know?
Dor countered, using her own query. It just stands to reason that a sweet maid like me tastes better than any old messy goblin. Dor found it hard to refute that logic. Certainly he would rather kiss her than a goblin. Now, what had put that thought in his mind? "I am unable to follow your full dialogue," Jumper said, "but I gather the female of your species does not trust me." "Right on target, monster," she agreed.
You do take some getting used to," Dor said. You, appear as strange to her as she does to you."
Jumper was startled. It could not be that extreme.
Well, maybe I exaggerated.
Diplomacy or truth? "The thing actually talks," the girl exclaimed. "Only it throws its voice to your shoulder."
Well, that's hard to explain.
"Nevertheless," Jumper cut in, "we had better vacate this nest quickly." "Why does its voice come from your shoulder?" the girl insisted. Evidently, she had a lively curiosity.
I made a translation web, Dor explained. Jumper's voice is the chitter. You should at least say hello to him.
Oh. She leaned forward, giving Dor his first conscious peek down into a buxom bodice. Stunned, he stood stock still. Hello, jumper monster, she said to the web. Wow, said the web. Get a load of that.
You don't have to speak to the web, Dor said quickly, though he was sorry to undeceive her. Now she wouldn't be leaning at him any more. A background region of his mind wondered why a spider web would care to remark on that particular view offered, as it was surely not of interest to spiders.
Yellow silk, the web finished, even as Dor's guilty thought progressed.
Oh, of course. Spiders were interested in silk, and colored silk would be a novelty. That's hair, not silk, he murmured, then more loudly to the girl. Jumper understands you without the web.
About vacating the nest,
Jumper chittered. Yes. Can you make another drag line for her?
Immediately.
Jumper moved toward the girl.
Eek!
She screamed, flinging her silk about.
The hairy monster's going to eat me.
Be quiet, Dor snapped, losing patience despite the impression her attributes had made on him. Either this body had singular appetites, or he had been missing a whole dimension of experience all his prior life. You'll bring back the hoorah, she quieted and reluctantly.
I won't let that thing near me.
She would talk to the spider, but not cooperate with him. She seemed almost as juvenile as Dor himself. I can't carry you down, he told her. I'm only... He broke off. He was no longer a 12-year-old boy in body, but a powerful man. Well, maybe I can. Jumper, will the line hold 2 of us?
Indubitably. I have only to make a stronger cable, the spider chittered,
his spinnerets already at work. In moments he had made a new harness for Dor with a stronger cable. Meanwhile the girl, with her irrepressible feminine curiosity, was exploring the nest.
Oh, jewels!
She exclaimed, clapping her cute little hands together excitedly. What kind? Dor asked, wondering whether they would be useful for buying food or shelter later on. Jewels were not nearly as valuable in Xanth as in Mundania, but many people liked them.
We are cultured pearls, several voices chorused, most refined and well-mannered, with our lineage dating back to the emperor of all oysters. We are aristocrats among jewels. Oh, I'll take you, the girl cried, seeming unsurprised at their speech. She scooped them up and filled her apron pockets. Now they heard the hoorah returning. Dor put his left arm around the girl's slender and supple waist and lifted her easily off her feet. What power this body had! Maybe it wasn't his muscles so much as her lack of mass. She was feather-like, though firmly fleshed. There must be a special magic about girls like this, he thought, to make them full yet light. He leaped over the edge of the nest, trusting Jumper's dragline to preserve them from a fall. The girl screamed, kicked her feet, and flung her hair in his face. Quiet, he said around a mouthful of golden strands, holding her close so she wouldn't wiggle loose. He was feeling very heroic at the moment. The line went taut. It was springy, like a big rubber band from a rubber tree. They bounced back up almost to the base of the nest. The girl jiggled against him. all soft and intriguing in a fashion he would have liked to understand better, but he had no chance to explore that matter at the moment. As they steadied, Jumper came down to join them. He did not jerk and bounce. He glided to a controlled halt beside them, for he was paying out his dragline as he went. I have set up a pulley, he chittered. My weight will counterbalance yours, but the two of you weigh more than I do, so I'm depending on friction to keep it slow. Dor did not follow all of that. But of the magic called friction could but if the magic called friction could safely lower them, good. They were all three descending at a fair but not frightening rate, and that was satisfactory. The branches of the huge tree were passing interminably, its layers of leaves concealing them from the nest. A shadow fell across them. It was the hoorah bird, circling down to spy out its lost artifacts. In a moment it would spot them, for they were in a slanting sunbeam. Dor tried to draw his sword with his right hand, but that was difficult while he was supporting the girl with his left arm. Light she was, but she seemed to be getting heavier. Again he worried about severing his own lifeline as the blade emerged from its scabbard. Hang still, Jumper chittered. A still target is very hard to locate. Dor gave up on the sword, but they couldn't hang still. Dor and the girl weighed too much. They kept dropping, while the spider rose, hauled by the magic of the pulley. Jumper grabbed onto a branch with several legs, did something, and scurried along the branch toward the trunk of the tree. Dor and the girl did not fall. Dor realized that Jumper had fastened his line to the branch, halting the pulley action. That left Dor and the terrified girl dangling like bait for the hoorah. She was squirming, twitching her silk, and kicking her feet uselessly. His left arm, despite its mighty thews, was tiring. Pretty soon he'd be down to one thew, then none. Girls certainly were a nuisance at times. The hoorah spotted the motion. Hoorah! It cried, and angled down. Suddenly, a green and gray-brown shape hurtled at them from the side. It seemed to have a mustached face on it. The girl screamed piercingly and flung out her arms, banging Dor's nose with her cute elbow. He almost dropped her, but the shape was now in contact with them, its momentum shoving them all to the side, swinging on the line until they came up against a leafy branch. The hurtling hoorah missed, swerving barely in time to avoid smacking its beak into the main tree trunk. I will attempt to distract it, Jumper chittered, for of course he was the one who had rescued them. It was a variegated abdomen face pattern Dor had noted. I have tied you to this branch. The bird may not see you if you remain motionless and silent. Fat chance. The girl inhaled and opened her pretty mouth to scream again. Dor put his big, ugly right hand across it. Quiet! She murmured, one eye above his hand filling with anger, while the other eye retained its terror. He hoped she wasn't saying the unmaid-like things he feared she was saying. It would be detrimental to her image. Well, if you'd only accepted a dragline for yourself, you wouldn't be in this picklement, Dor whispered back. But he knew that was unfair. The hoorah had returned too soon, regardless. Come and get me, Featherbrain, Jumper chittered from another branch. Of course, the translation came from Dor's shoulder, but the spider also waved his forelegs, and that attracted the bird's attention. The hoorah zoomed toward the branch, and the spider sprang 20 feet to another, chittering vehemently. Dor knew the big bird could not understand Jumper's actual words, but the tone was unmistakable. Then again, why shouldn't birds comprehend spider language? The two species interacted often enough. which illustrated the supreme courage Jumper was displaying, for the thing he most feared was birds. To save his friend and a stranger, the spider was baiting his personal nightmare menace. "You can do better than that, Squawkhead," Jumper chittered, and jumped again, as a bird wheeled in the air. The hoorah was remarkably agile for its size. After several futile passes, the bird realized that Jumper was too quick for it to catch. Just as well, as the translations of the spider's insults were turning the girl's ears a delicate shell pink. The hoorah looked around, casting about for the other prey. Fortunately, all they had to do was remain still and silent. Dor, trying to make his fatigued left arm more comfortable, shifted his hold slightly. The girl slipped down a bit, her bosom getting squeezed. She screamed, almost without taking a breath, catching him off guard. Oh no! Dor, needing his right hand to help hold on to the branch, had uncovered her mouth. Foolish mistake. The hoorah oriented immediately on the sound. It zoomed directly toward them. Jumper was behind it, unable to distract it this time. The hoorah knew easy prey when it found it. With the inspiration of desperation, Dor grabbed with his right hand at the girl's clothing, questing for her pockets. Though she wore a showy dress that was cut high at the knees and low at the bodice, her apron covered much of that and was utilitarian. She screamed as if attacked, not unreasonably in this case, but he continued until he found what he was looking for, the cultured pearls she had picked up from the nest.
"What is your pet peeve?"
he demanded as he flipped the first pearl into the air. "I don't make pets of peeves," the pearl retorted, "but I hate people who drop me off branches." It dropped out of sight, and the hoorah, tracing the sound of its voice, followed it down. Jumper half bounded, half swung across to them. "Marvelous ploy," he chittered. "Throw the next to the side, and I will lower you quietly to the ground."
"Right,"
Dor agreed. He faced the girl.
"And don't scream,"
he warned. She inhaled the scream.
"Or I'll tickle you."
That got her. Meekly, she let herself deflate. She even handed him a pearl from her apron breast pocket, so he wouldn't have to dig it out himself. That was almost more cooperative than he liked.
"And what is your pet peeve?"
he inquired of the pearl, and hurled it to the side. "I hate uncultured people who can't appreciate cultured pearls," it cried. They heard a hoorah in the distance as a bird went after it. The bird certainly appreciated cultured pearls. By the time they reached the ground, they were out of pearls, but also out of peril. They had lost the bird. Dor picked up a few sticks of wood for emergency use in case a hoorah came near again, and the three of them hurried away.
"You see,"
the ring on Dor's finger cried,
"I granted your wish. You are safe on the ground."
"I guess I can't argue with that," Dor agreed, but he maintained a healthy private reservation. Dor judged they were now fairly close to Castle Roogna, since the hoorah bird had carried them in the right direction. But the day was waning, and he didn't want to hurry lest they fall into another trap. So they foraged for supper, locating a few marshmallow bushes and an apple pine and some iced tea leaves. Jumper tried a bit of pineapple, but declared he preferred crustaceans. The girl had finally come to accept the big spider as a companion, and even allowed Jumper to string her up for the night. She was, she confessed daintily, afraid of bugs and things on the ground, and at the moment was none too keen on birds and trees either. Thus, the three of them hung comfortably from silken threads, safe from the predators above and below. There were advantages to the arachnid mode, Dor decided. Jumper fell silent, no doubt already asleep and recuperating from his formidable exertions of the day. But Dor and the girl talked for a while, in low tones so as not to attract unwanted and or hazardous attention. "Where do you come from?" she inquired. "Where do you go?" Dor answered as briefly as he could, omitting the details about his age and the relation of his world to hers. He told her he was from a strange land, like this one, but far removed, and he had come here looking for the zombie master, who might help him obtain an elixir to help a friend. He made clear that Jumper was from the same land, and was his trusted friend. After all, without Jumper, we would never have escaped from the Hoorah's nest. Her story was as simple. "I am a maid of just barely maybe 17, from the west stockade by the lovely seashore where the gayest gourds grow, traveling to the new capital to seek my fortune. But when I crossed a high ridge to stay away from the tiger lilies, you know, because they have a special taste for sweet young things, those lilies of the valley, the hoorah bird spotted me, and though I screamed and flung my hair about and kicked my feet exactly as a maid is supposed to, well, you know the rest."
"We can help you get to Castle Roogna, since we're going there too," Dor said.
It probably was not much of a coincidence, since the castle was the social and magical center of Xanth. No doubt everyone who was anyone went to Castle Roogna. She clapped her hands in that girlishly cute way she had, and jiggled in her harness with that womanly provocation she also had. "Oh, would you? That's wonderful." Dor was pleased, too. It was delightful company.
"But what will you do at Castle Roogna?" he inquired.
"I hope to find, employment as a chambermaid. There to encounter completely by surprise some handsome courtier who will love me madly and take me away from it all. And I shall live happily ever after in his rich house, when all I ever expected was a life of chambermaiding." Dor, even in his youth, knew this to be a simplistic ambition. Why should a courtier elect to marry a common chambermaid? But he had sense enough not to disparage her ambition. Instead, he remembered a question he had overlooked before, perhaps because he had been looking at other aspects of her nature. Those aspects she kicked and bounced and flung about so freely.
"What is your name?"
"Oh," she laughed musically, making a token kick and bounce and fling. "Didn't I tell you? I am Millie the maid." Dor hung there, stunned. Of course. He should have recognized her. 12 years younger, 812 years younger. Herself, as she was before he had ever known her. Young and inexperienced and hopeful, and above all, innocent. Stripped of the grim experience of 8 centuries of ghosthood. A naive, cute girl hardly older than himself. Hardly older? 5 years older. And they were monstrous years. She was every resilient inch a woman, while he was but a boy of... "I wish I were a man," he murmured.
"Done!" the ring on his finger cried. "I now pronounce you man."
"What?" Millie inquired gently. Of course she didn't recognize him. Not only was he not in his own body, he wouldn't even exist for 800 years.
I was just wishing.
Yes?
The ring said eagerly.
Dor bobbed his head.
Then I could get rid of this infernal flea that keeps binding me, and get some sleep, he said.
Now wait, the ring protested. I can do anything, but you're asking for two things at once.
I'll settle for sleep,
Dor said. Before long, the sleep came to pass. He dreamed of standing near a huge, brightly bedecked gumball bush, wanting a gumball awfully bad, especially a golden one close by, but restrained by the magic curse that might be protecting the fruits. It was not merely that he wasn't certain how to pluck a gumball without invoking the curse. It was that the bush was in the yard of another house, so that he really was not sure he had the right to pluck from it. It was a tall bush, with its luscious fruits dangling out of his normal reach, but he was up on magic stilts, very long and strong, so that now he stood tall enough to reach the delightfully golden globe easily, if only he dared. If only he should. More than that, he had never, as a child, liked gumballs that well. He had seen others liking them, but he had never understood why. Now he wanted one so badly, and was suspicious of this change in himself. Dor woke in turmoil. Jumper was hanging near him, several eyes watching him with concern. "Are you well, friend Doorman?" the spider chittered.
Just a nightmare,
Dor said uncertainly. "This is an illness?"
There are magic horses, half illusion, who chase people at night, scaring them, Dor explained. So when a person experiences something frightening at night, he calls it a night stallion or a nightmare.
Ah, figurative, Jumper agreed once he understood. You dreamed of such a horse, a mare, a female.
Yes, a horse of another color. I wanted to ride that mare very much, but wasn't sure I could stay on that golden mount. Oh, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Jumper considered.
Please do not be offended, friend. I do not as yet comprehend your language well, or your nature. Are you by chance a juvenile, a young entity?
Yes,
Dor replied tightly. The spider seemed to understand him well enough.
One beneath the normal breeding age of your species?
Yes.
And this sleeping female of your kind, her with the golden silk, she is mature?
Yes.
I believe your problem is natural. You have merely to wait until you mature. Then you will suffer no further confusion.
But suppose she belongs to another.
There is no ownership in this sort of thing, Jumper assured him. She will indicate whether she finds you suitable.
Suitable for what?
Jumper made a chitter chuckle.
That will become apparent at the appropriate occasion.
You sound like King Trent,
Dor said accusingly.
Who I presume is a mature male of your species, perhaps of middle age.
On target. Despite his confusion and frustration, Dor was glad to have such a person with him. The outer form hardly mattered. Millie stirred, and Dor suffered a sudden eagerness to halt this conversation. It was dawn anyway. Time to eat and resume the trek to Castle Roogna. Dor got bearings from the local sticks and stones, and they set off for the castle. But this time they encountered a large river. Dor didn't remember this from his own time. But of course the channel could have shifted in 800 years, and with the charmed paths he might not have noticed a river anyway. The water was quite specific in answer to Dor's question. The castle lay beyond the far side, and there was no convenient way across the water.
I wish I had a good way to pass this river, Dor said.
I'll see to it,
The ring on his finger said.
just give me a little time. I got you to sleep last night, didn't I? You have to have patience, you know.
I know, Dor said with a half smile.
Rome wasn't built in a day, after all.
I could balloon us across, Jumper offered.
Last time we ballooned, the hoorah nabbed us, Dor pointed out. And if it hadn't, we probably would have been blown right out of Xanth anyway. I don't want to risk that again.
Ballooning is somewhat at the mercy of the winds, the spider agreed. I had intended to fasten an anchor to the ground before, so that we could not be blown too far, and could always return to our starting point if necessary. But I admit I reckoned without the big bird. I had somehow thought no other creatures had been expanded in size the way I had been. In retrospect, a foolish assumption. I agree. Ballooning is best saved for an emergency. In my stockade, we use boats to cross water, Millie offered, with spells to ward off water monsters. Do you know how to make a boat? Jumper chittered. The question was directed at Millie, but the web on Dor's shoulder translated it anyway. Inanimate objects tended to become more accommodating when they associated with him for prolonged periods. No, she said. I am a maid. And maids did not do anything useful? Maybe she simply meant she was not involved in masculine pursuits.
Do you know the anti-water monster spells? Dor asked her.
No, only our stockade monster speller can do those. That's his talent. Dor exchanged glances with several of Jumper's eyes. The girl was nice, but she wasn't much help. I believe your sword would proffer some discouragement to water predators, Jumper chittered. I could loop their extremities with silk and render them vulnerable to your sharp edge. Dor did not relish the prospect of battling water monsters, but recognized the feasibility of the spider's proposal.
Except the boat. We still need that, he pointed out, almost with relief.
I think I might fashion a craft from silk, Jumper chittered. In fact, I can walk on water sometimes, when the surface is calm. I might tow the boat across. Why not just go across and string up one of your lines? Millie inquired. Then you could draw us across, as you drew us up into the tree last night. Excellent notion, the spider agreed. If I could get across without attracting attention.
Maybe we could set up a distraction, Dor suggested, so they wouldn't notice you.
They discussed details, then proceeded. They gathered a number of sticks and stones for Dor to talk to, which would serve as one type of distraction, and located a few stink bugs, which they hoped would be another type of distraction. Stink bugs smelled mild enough when handled gently, but exploded with stench when abused. Jumper fashioned several stout ropes of silk, attaching one to an overhanging tree and leaving the others for the people to use as lariats. When all was ready, Jumper set off across the water. His 8 feet made dents in the surface, but did not break through. Actually, he was quite fleet, almost skating across. But all too soon there was a ripple behind him. A great ugly snout broke the surface, a serpentine river monster. All they could see was part of the head, but it was huge. No small boat would have been safe, and neither was Jumper. This was the type of monster much in demand for moat service.
Hey, Snout Nose, Dor called.
He saw an ear twitch on the monster's head, but its glassy eye remained fixed on the spider. More distraction was needed, and quickly. Dor took a stick of wood, as large as he thought he could throw that distance.
Stick? I'll bet you can't insult that monster enough to make it chase you.
Insults seemed to be a prime tool for making monsters react.
Oh, yeah, the stick retorted. Just try me, dirt face.
Dor glanced into the surface of the water. Sure enough, he had dirt smeared across his face. But that would have to wait.
Go to it,
he said, and hurled the stick far out toward the monster. The stick splashed just behind the great head, an almost perfect throw. Dor could never have done that in his own body. The monster whirled around, thinking it was an attack from behind.
Look at that snooty snout,
the stick cried as it bobbed amidst its ripples. Water monsters, it was said, were quite vain about their ferocious faces.
If I had a mug like that, I'd bury it in green mud.
The monster lifted its head high.
Honk!
It exclaimed angrily. It could not talk the human language, but evidently understood it well enough. Most monsters who hoped for mode employment made it a point to develop some acquaintance with the employer's mode of communication.
Blow out that tube before you choke,
the stick said, warming up to its task.
I haven't heard a noise like that since a bull croaked smacked into my tree and brained out its brainless brains.
The monster made a strike at the stick. The diversion was working. But already Dor saw other ripples following, the pattern of them orienting on Jumper. The spider was moving rapidly, but not fast enough to escape these creatures. Time for the next ploy. Dor grabbed the rope strung to the tree, hauled himself up, and swung out over the water.
Hoorah!
He cried. Heads popped out of the water, now orienting on him. Toothy, glare-eyed excrescences on sinuous necks.
You can't catch me, deadpans, he cried.
Deadpans were creatures who lurked around cooking fires, associating with slinky copperheads and similar ilk, and had the ugliest faces found in nature. Several of the monsters were quite willing to try. White wakes appeared as the heads coursed forward. Dor hastily swung back and jumped ashore.
How many monsters are there?
He demanded, amazed at the number. Always one more than you can handle, the water replied. That's standard operating procedure. That made magical sense. Too bad he hadn't realized it before Jumper exposed himself on the water. But how, then, could he distract them all? He had to try, lest Jumper be caught. It was not as if he were a garden variety traveler. He was a magician. Dor picked up a stink bug, rolled it into a ball, and threw it as hard as he could toward the skating spider. Jumper was now over halfway across the river and making good time. The bug, angered by this treatment, bounced on the water behind the spider and burst into stench. Dor could not smell it from this distance, but he heard the monsters in that vicinity choking and retreating. Dor threw 3 more bugs, just to be sure, then Jumper was out of range. Millie was doing her part. She was capering beside the water and waving her hands and calling out to the monsters. Her flesh bounced in what had to be, to a monster, the tastiest manner. Even Dor felt like taking a bite. Or something. The trouble was, the monsters were responding too well.
Get back, Millie,
Dor cried.
They have long necks.
Indeed they did. One monster shot its head forward, jaws gaping. Slavers sprayed out past the projecting tiers of teeth. Glints shot from the cruel eyes. Millie, abruptly aware of her peril, stood frozen. What No kicks and screams? Dor asked himself. Maybe it was because she had been kicking and screaming in a manner before, so that would have represented no contrast. Dor's fingers scrabbled over his shoulder for his sword as he leaped to intercept the monster. He jerked at the hilt, and it snagged, wrenching out of his hand as the sword cleared the scabbard. The blade tumbled to the ground. "Oh, no!" the sword moaned. Dor found himself striking a dramatic pose before the monster, sword hand upraised, and empty. The monster did a double take. Then it started to chuckle. Dor somewhat sheepishly bent to retrieve his weapon, and of course the toothed snout dived down to chomp him. Dor leaped up, legs spread to vault the descending head, and boxed the monster on one ear with his left fist. Then he landed, whirled, and brought his sword to bear. He did not strike, yet the gleaming blade poised before one of the monster's eyeballs. The gleam of the blade bounced the eye's glints away harmlessly. "Now, I spare you where you did not spare me," he said. "Do you take that as a signal of weakness?" The eye stared into the sword point. The monster's head quivered in negation as it slid back. Dor strode forward, keeping his point near the eye. In a moment, the head disappeared beneath the surface of the river. The other monsters, noting this, did not advance. They assumed Dor had some powerful magic, and he realized this truth, which his body had known. Deal with the leader, and you have dealt with the followers.
"Why, that's the bravest thing I ever saw!"
Millie exclaimed, clapping her hands again. She did that often now, and it sent most interesting ripples through her torso. Yet Dor had never seen her do it in his own world. What had changed? 800 years of half-life. That was what had changed her. Most of her maidenly bounce had been pressed out of her by that tragedy. But more immediately, what had changed in him? He should never have had the nerve to face up to a full-fledged river monster, let alone cowed into retreat. Yet he had done so unthinkingly when Millie was threatened. Maybe it was his body taking over again, reacting in a conditioned way, even to the extent of facing down a monster in such a way as to abate the whole fleet of monsters at once. What kind of a man had this body been before Dor arrived? Where had he gone? Would he return when Dor went back to his own world? He had thought this body was stupid, but now there seemed to be considerable compensations. Maybe the body had never needed to worry too much about danger before, because of its competence in handling that danger when it faced it. This body, without Dor present to mess it up, could have handled that whole goblin band alone. The flea bit him just over the right ear. Dor almost sliced his own head off, trying to swat it with his sword hand. Here he could face down a monster, but could not get rid of a single pesky flea. One of these days he was going to find a flea repellent plant.
"Look, the spider's made it across,"
Millie cried. So he had. Their distractions had been sufficient after all. Maybe there had been one more monster than Dor could handle. But he had not been alone. Relieved, Dor went to the tree where the crossing cable had been anchored. Already it was tightening, lifting out of the water, as Jumper labored at the other end to draw it taut. The spider could exert a lot of force on a line, achieving special leverage with his 8 legs. Soon the cable stretched from tree to tree, sagging only slightly in the middle of the river, as nearly as Dor could see. It was an extremely stout line, compared to Jumper's usual, but still it tended to disappear in the distance. "Now we can hand-walk it across," Dor said, and asked himself, "We can?"
"Maybe you can," Millie said. "You're a big, brave, strong, rugged man. But I am a little diffident, weak, soft-made. I could never." If only she knew Dor's true state. "Very well. I'll carry you." Dor picked her up, set her in the tree at the end of the line, then hauled himself up with a convulsive heave of his thews. He planted his boots on the cable, found his balance, and picked Millie up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she cried, alarmed. She kicked her feet. Dor noticed again how dainty her feet were, and how cutely they kicked. There was an art to foot kicking, and she had it. The legs had to flex at the knees, and the feet had to swing just so, not so fast that the legs could not be clearly seen. "You can't possibly keep your balance." "That's so?" he inquired. "Then I suppose we will fall into the river and have to swim after all." He walked forward, balancing. "Are you crazy?" she demanded, horrified. And he echoed to himself, "Am I crazy?" He knew such a feat of balancing was impossible without magical assistance. Yet here was this body doing it. What superb equilibrium this barbarian body had! No wonder mundane waves had conquered Xanth over and over, despite all the power of magic brought to bear against them. Millie stopped kicking, afraid she would make him lose his balance. Dor marveled as he went. Had he realized the potentialities of this body before, he would have been much less afraid of heights. He realized now that his concern about certain things, such as taking a fall, was not inherent, but more a product of his own frailty of physique. When he had confidence in his abilities, fear faded. So, to that extent, the body of a man did make him more of a man in spirit, too. Then, more trouble came. Big, ugly shapes flitted out of the forest to hover above the river. They were too solid for birds. Their heads were man-sized. The grotesque flock milled for a moment, then spied the figures on the cable. "Hee!" one cried, and they all wheeled and bore on Dor. "Harpies!" Millie cried. "Oh, we are undone!" Dor wanted to reach for his sword, but couldn't. Both arms were taken with the girl. The river monsters were lurking at a discreet distance. They were cautious about approaching this formidable man while he kept his feet, but might have second thoughts if he were floundering in the water, as he soon would be if he grabbed for his sword, dropped Millie, and lost his balance. He was helpless. The harpies closed on them, their dirty wings wafting a foul odor down. Dirty birds indeed. They were greasy avians with the heads and breasts of women. Not pretty faces and breasts like Millie's. Their visages were witch-like and their dugs grotesque. Their voices were raucous. Their birdie legs had great, ugly, chipped talons. "What a find, sisters!" the leader harpy screeched. "Take them! Take them!" The flock plunged down, screaming with glee. Claws closed as half a dozen foul creatures clutched at Millie, who screamed and kicked and flung her tresses about to no avail, as usual. She was torn from Dor's grasp and lifted into the sky. Then about 10 more harpies converged on Dor himself. Their talons closed on his forearms, his biceps, his calves, thighs, hair, and belt. The claws were rounded, without cutting edges, so did not hurt him so long as the points were clear. They merely clamped onto his appendages like manacles. The grimy wings beat powerfully, and he was borne upward in their putrid midst. They carried him across the water and into the forest at treetop level, so that his sagging posterior almost brushed the highest fronds.
They hoisted him on through the forest until they reached a great cleft in the ground, where they glided down. This was not the gap. It was far smaller, more on par with the crevice he had entered on the magic carpet. Could it be the same one? No, the location was wrong, and the configuration different. Dug into the cliff-like sides of this one were grubby holes, caves made by the harpies for their nests. They bore him down into the largest cave and dumped him unceremoniously on the filthy floor. Dor got up, brushing dirt off his body. Millie was not there. They must have taken her to another cave. Unless there were connecting passages, which seemed unlikely, since these creatures flew better than they walked, he would be unable to reach her by foot. He retained his sword, but could not hope to slay all the harpies in this degenerate harpy city. They would overwhelm him. Either they knew this and so had contempt for his blade, or they simply hadn't recognized it in its mundane sheath across his back. The latter seemed more likely. At last he was beginning to appreciate that location. So it would be foolish to betray his possession of the weapon by making a premature move. He would have to wait and see what they wanted from him, just in case it wasn't a quick meal of his flesh, and fight only as a last resort. One thing about being a hero, the threats were larger than life, and the glooms gloomier. In his real life, he would never have gotten into a situation like this. The harpies scuttled back, leaving one especially hideous crone before him. "My, aren't you the husky one?" she cackled, her ropey hair flying about wildly as she pecked her head forward, chicken-like. Maybe those were feathers on her pate. It was hard to tell under the muck. "Good teeth. Good muscle tone. Handsome. Yes, you'll do just fine."
Just fine for what?
Dor demanded with more belligerence than he felt. He was scared. "Just fine for my chick," the old hen clucked. "Heavenly Helen, Harpy Queen. Weeding a man on alternate generations. A vulture the other times."
What have you done with the girl?
Dor decided not to name her, lest these polluted monsters assume he was closer to her, or she to him, than she was, and try to coerce him by torturing her. He knew monsters would do this sort of thing. That was the nature of monsters, after all. He was quite right. "She will be cooked upon a fire of dung for supper," the canny old bird screeched gleefully. "She's such a delectable morsel, unless you do as we demand."
But you haven't told me what you demand.
"Haven't we now?" The dirty bird cocked her head at him cannily. "Are you trying to feign innocence? That will get you nowhere, my pretty man-type male buck. Into the nest with you." And she partly spread her awful wings and advanced, her stink smiting him anew. Dor backed off and stumbled into an offshoot cave. So, there were interconnecting passages. This one was not large enough for him to stand in. It was more suitable for scuttling. So he scuttled around a bend, and the tunnel opened into a fair-sized chamber whose domed ceiling did permit him to climb back to his feet. Another harpy faced him there, but what a difference there was! This was a young bird, with metallic sheen on her feathers, shiny brass claws, the face and breasts of a lovely maiden, and she was clean. Her hair was neatly brushed, each tress luxuriant. If there were any feathers in it, they were silken ones. She was the prettiest harpy Dor had ever seen. or imagined.
So, you are the man Mama found for me,
Helen Harpy murmured. Her voice was sultry, no screech. Dor looked around. The chamber was bare except for the large nest in the center, formed of fluffy down feathers so that it sprang up like a magic bubble bath. The room opened out on the canyon, sheer drop of a couple 100 feet. Even if he were able to navigate that, how could he rescue Millie? One could hardly climb a sheer rock face while screaming and kicking one's feet.
I think I'm going to enjoy this,
Helen murmured.
I had my doubts when Mama said she'd find me a man, but I did not know how fine a man she intended. I'm so glad I wasn't in the vulture generation, the way Mama was.
Vulture? Dor asked, casting about for some other exit. If he could sneak through a tunnel, find Millie.
We're half human, half vulture, she explained. Since there are no males of our species, we have to alternate.
Dor had not realized there were no male harpies. Somehow he had supposed there were, in his day, but he had never looked into the matter. All he had ever actually seen were females. Any males there were kept pretty much to themselves, making the females do the foraging. At any rate, this was not his present concern. He had a bright idea. Nest, what's the best way out of here?
Oblige the harpy,
the nest replied, its down feathers wafting softly as it spoke. They were of pastel hues, pretty.
They hardly ever kill breeders, unless they're really hungry.
I don't even know what the harpy wants, Dor protested.
Come here,
the fair harpy murmured.
I'll show you what I want, you delightful hunk of a man.
I wish I were out of here, Dor murmured. I'm still working on the river crossing, the ring on his finger complained.
What's that?
Helen asked, spreading her pretty little wings. Her down feathers were as white as her breasts, and probably as soft. A magic ring. It grants wishes, Dor said, hoping this was not too great an exaggeration. Actually, he hadn't caught the ring failing. He just was never sure that its successes were by any agency of its own magic.
Oh, I've always wanted one of those.
Dor pulled it off his finger. You might as well have it. I just want to rescue Millie. Oops, he had said her name. Helen snatched the proffered ring. Harpies were very good at snatching.
You're not a goblin spy, are you? We're at war with the goblins.
Dor hadn't known that. We killed a number of goblins. A band of them attacked us.
Good. The goblins are our mortal enemies.
Dor's curiosity was aroused. Why? You're both monsters. I should think you'd get along together.
We did, once, long ago. But the goblins did us the foulest of turns. So now we are at war with them.
Dor sat down on the edge of the nest. It was as soft and fluffy as it looked. That's funny. I thought only my own kind waged war.
We're half your kind, you know,
she said. She seemed fairly nice as he got to know her. She smelled faintly of roses. Apparently it was only the old harpies who were so awful. A lot of creatures are, like the centaurs, merfolk, fauns, werewolves, sphinxes, and all. And they all inherited man's warlike propensities. The worst are the pseudo-men, like the trolls, ogres, elves, giants, and goblins. They all have armies and go on rampages of destruction periodically. How much better it would be if we half-humans had inherited your intelligence, curiosity, and artistry without your barbarity. She was actually making increasing sense. Maybe if you had inherited our other halves, so you had the heads of vultures and the hindquarters of people. She laughed musically. It would have made breeding easier. But I'd rather have the intelligence, despite its flaws. What did the goblins do to the harpies? She sighed, breathing long. She had a most impressive human portion that way, and Dor was glad it was the upper section she had inherited. That is a long story, handsome human. Come, rest your head against my wing, and I'll preen the dirt from your face while I tell you. That seemed harmless. He leaned back against her wing and found it firm and smooth and slightly resilient, with a fresh feather smell. Way back when Xanth was new, she said in a dulcet narrative style, and the creatures were experiencing the first great radiation of forms, becoming all the magical combinations we know today. We half-people felt an affinity for each other. She licked his cheek delicately with her tongue. About to protest, Dor realized that this was what she meant by preening. Well, he had agreed to it, and actually the sensation was not bad at all. The full men from Mundania came in savage waves, killing and destroying, she continued, giving his ear a little nip. We half-humans had to cooperate merely to survive. The goblins lived adjacent to we harpies. Or is that us harpies? I can never remember. Sometimes even sharing the same caves. They slept by day and foraged by night, while we foraged by day. So our two species were able to use the same sleeping areas. But as our populations grew, there was not enough room for us all. Her preening, fitted between words, had progressed to his mouth. Her lips were remarkably soft and sweet as they traversed his own. If he hadn't known better, he might have thought this was a kiss. Some of our hens had to move out and build nests in trees, she continued, reaching the other side of his face. They got to like that better, and still do perch in trees. But the goblins became covetous of our space, and reasoned that if there were fewer of us, there would be room for more of them. So they conspired against our innocence. Their females, some of whom in those days were very comely, lured away our males, corrupting them with... She paused and her wing shuddered. This was evidently difficult for her. It was none too easy for Dor either, because now her breast was against his cheek, as she strained to reach the far side of his neck. Somehow he found it difficult to concentrate on her words. With their arms and legs, Helen got out at last. We had not been so long diverged from human beings
that our males did not remember and lust after what they called real girls, though most human and humanoid women would not have anything to do with vulture tails. When the lady goblins became approachable, I would term them other than ladies, but I'm not supposed to know that sort of language. When these creatures beckoned our cocks, oh, males are such foolish things.
Right, Dor agreed, feeling pretty foolish himself, half smothered between her neck and bosom. He knew better than to argue with the really foolish sex.
And so we lost our cock harpies, and our hens became soured. That's why we have a certain exaggerated reputation for being impolite to people. What's the use of trying when there are no cocks to please?
But that was only one generation, Dor protested. More cocks should have hatched in the next generation.
No, there were no more eggs, no fertile ones. There had never been a great number of cocks. Our kind hatched about 5 females for every male, and now there were none. Our hens became old and bitter, unfulfilled. There's nothing so bitter as an old harpy with an empty nest.
Yes, of course. She seemed finally to have completed the preening. He had no doubt his face was shiningly clean now. But why didn't all the harpies die out then?
We hens had to seek males of other species. We abhor the necessity, but our alternative is extinction. Since we derived originally from a cross between human and vulture, I understand that was quite a scene there at the Love Spring. We have had to return to these sources to maintain our nature. There are problems, however. The human and vulture males aren't inclined generally to mate with harpies, and we can't always get them to the Love Spring to make it happen. And when they do, the result is always a female chick. It seems only a harpy cock can generate males of our species. So we have become a flock of old hens.
That was some history. Dor had heard about the nefarious love springs, where diverse creatures innocently drank, then plunged into love with the next creature of the opposite sex they met. Much of the population of Xanth was the fault of such springs, producing the remarkable crossbreeds that thereafter bred true. Fortunately, the love water had to be fresh, or it lost its potency. Otherwise, people would be endlessly slipping it into the cups of their friends as practical jokes. But he could see how this would create a problem for the harpies, who could not always carry a potential mate to the spring or make him drink from it. Now Helen's whole body shook with rage. Her voice took on a little of the tone of the older harpies.
And this is what the cursed goblins did to us, and why we hate them and war with them. We want to kill off all their males as they did ours. We shall fight until we have our vengeance for all the horrible wrong they did us. Already we are massing our armies and gathering our allies among the winged kinds, and we shall wreak a fittingly horrible vengeance by scratching the goblin nation from the fair face of Xanth.
By this time, Dor had fairly well grasped the purpose for which he had been brought here. I sympathize with your predicament, but I can't really help you. I'm too young. I'm not a man yet. She drew back and twisted her head to look at him, her large eyes larger yet. "You certainly look like a man." I got quite big suddenly. I'm really 12 years old. That's not much for my kind. I just want to help my friend Millie. She considered momentarily. 12 years old. That just might be statutory seduction. Very well. I'll accept the ring you offered in lieu of the other. Maybe it can wish me a fertile egg.
I can,
the ring exclaimed eagerly. I didn't really want to do this now, anyhow, Helen said as she screwed the ring onto her largest claw. It merely held it up till now. Mama insisted, that's all. You can have the girl, though at your age, I really don't know what you'll do with her. She's 4 caves to the right.
Thank you, Dor said. Won't your mother object? I mean, if I just walk out?
Not if I don't squawk. And I won't squawk if the ring works okay.
But that ring takes time to operate, even if...
Oh, go ahead. Can't you see I'm trying to give you a break?
Dor went ahead. Wasn't sure how long she would have patience with the ring, or whether she would suddenly change her mind. Of course, it was always possible that the ring really could produce. How nice for the harpies if it could give them a male chick. But meanwhile, he didn't want to waste time. The old harridan eyed him suspiciously, but did not challenge him. He counted 4 sub-caves to the right and went in. Sure enough, there was Millie, disheveled but intact.
"Oh, Dor," she cried. "I knew you'd rescue me."
I haven't rescued you yet, he warned her. I traded my wishing ring to get to you.
"Then we'd better get out of here in a hurry. That ring couldn't wish itself out of a dream."
Why would it want to? He wondered. He checked the cave exit. Like the other, it opened onto a formidable drop. I don't think we can just walk out. I don't think there are any exits that don't require flying. And why the harpies aren't worried about us escaping.
They were threatening to cook me for supper. I'd rather jump than...
That was just to get me to cooperate, Dor said. Yet he had the grisly fear that it had been no bluff. Why should they have told her the threat when he wasn't there to hear? The harpies were not nice creatures.
To cooperate? What did they want from you?
A service I couldn't perform. Though this body of his had masculine capabilities and probably could. No, that wasn't the point. Millie looked at his face.
"It's clean,"
she exclaimed. I had it washed. Her eyes narrowed.
"About that service, are you sure?"
Damn that female intuition. Dor kneeled by the exit hole, feeling around it with his fingers. Maybe there are handholds or something. There weren't. The face of the cliff was as hard and smooth as glass, and the drop looked horrendous. He saw harpies flitting from other caves, coming and going, always flying. No hope there. Even if there had been handholds, they would have required both of his hands. He would have been unable to hold on to Millie with one, and she would have screamed and kicked her feet and flung her hair about and fallen to her death the moment she attempted to make such a climb by herself. She was a delectable female, but just not much use at man business. Not that he could make any such claim himself after that session with heavenly Helen Harpy. Helen had said that the harpies had once shared quarters with the goblins. The goblins did not fly, and he doubted they could climb well enough to handle this sheer cliff, If they had shared these caves, there had to be footpaths to them somewhere. Maybe these had been cemented over after the goblins had been driven out.
Walls. Do any of you conceal goblin tunnels? He asked.
Not me,
The walls chorused. You mean the goblins never used these caves? Dor demanded, disappointed.
Had Helen lied to him? Or had she been referring to other caves before the harpies moved here?
Untrue, the wall said. Goblins originally hollowed out these caves. Hollowed and hallowed before the war started.
Then how did the goblins get in and out?
Through the ceilings, of course.
Dor clapped the heel of his hand to his forehead. Of course. One problem with questioning the inanimate was that the inanimate didn't have much imagination and tended to answer literally. He had really meant to question all the artifacts in and of this chamber, but he had only actually named the walls, so only they had responded.
Ceiling, do you conceal a goblin passage?
I do,
the ceiling replied.
You could have saved a lot of trouble if you'd asked me first, instead of talking with those stupid walls.
Why isn't it visible?
The harpies sealed it over with mud plaster and droppings. Everyone knows that.
That's why the stink, Millie cried. They use their dung for building.
Dor drew his sword. Tell me where to strike to free the passage, he said.
Right here,
the ceiling said at one side. Dor dug his sword point in and twisted. A chunk of brown plaster dropped to the floor. He dug harder and gouged more out. Soon the passage opened. A draft of foul air washed down from the hole.
What's that fresh smell?
A harpy voice screeched from the cavern hall.
Fresh smell?
Dor exclaimed, almost choking on the stench. He and Millie had become more or less acclimatized to the odor pervading the caves, but now that the air was moving, his nostrils could not so readily filter it out. Yet perhaps this breeze was offensive to the harpies. The old hen appeared in the entrance.
They're trying to sneak out of the gold goblin hole, she screeched. Stop them!
Dor strode across to block her advance, sword held before him. Afoot, unable to spread her wings, the harpy was at a disadvantage and had to retreat.
Climb up the hole, Dor cried to Millie. Use the goblin passage to escape.
Millie stared up into the blackness of the hole.
I'm afraid, she cried. There might be nickelpedes.
That struck him. Nickelpedes were vicious insects 5 times as ferocious as centipedes, with pincers made of nickel. They attacked anything that moved in darkness. Now more harpies were pressing close. They respected Dor's bared blade, but did not retreat farther than they had to. He could not swing freely in the passage, and didn't want to shed their blood. After all, they were half human, and it wasn't nice to kill females. What was he going to do? With the harpies in front, and Millie balking, and an open cliff outside. In this situation, he couldn't fool anyone by making the walls talk. He was stuck. He might hold off the dirty birds indefinitely, but he couldn't escape. Actually, if they started flying in from the cliffside, he would have trouble, because he couldn't very well cover both entrances, and Millie would not be much help. And in due course, he and Millie would get tired, and hungry, and thirsty, and would have to sleep. They would be captive again.
Millie, you've got to get up that goblin passage, he cried.
No good, no good,
the harpies outside screeched.
We know where it goes. We're covering the exit. You can't escape.
Then why were they telling him this? Easier to nab him at the Goblin Tunnel exit, so they must be bluffing. Then Millie screamed. Dor looked and spied a huge hairy shape dropping out of the hole. Green Eyes looked back at him.
Jumper!
How glad he was to see the big spider again. I could not place my lines, the spider chittered. The lady man-birds would have spied me on the face of the cliff, so I had to come in this way.
But the harpies are watching the exit.
They are, but they did not follow me inside because of the nickelpedes.
But you...
Nickelpedes are pinching bugs. I was hungry anyway. They were delicious. Naturally, a spider would be able to handle big bugs, but the harpies were more formidable.
If we can't use the Goblin Tunnel,
Dor began. Jumper fastened a line to Millie and another to Dor. I am generating sufficient lines to lower you to the bottom, but you will have to let yourselves down. I suggest you swing and slide so the birds will not be able to catch you readily. I can't do that, Millie protested. I don't have big arm muscles and things. Dor glanced at her. She was half right. She did lack big arm muscles, but she certainly had things.
I'll carry you again.
He flicked his sword point, warning back the encroaching harpies. You'll need both arms to lower yourself, Jumper pointed out. I will jump across and string a guideline. That way you can swing from the center of the cleft, not banging the walls, but you will be caught in mid-air.
Can't be helped. You'll have to relax the guideline so we can drop slowly lower. Just be sure that line is tight when we start.
Yes, that is possible, though difficult. Your two weights will make a great deal of tension. Dor poked at the witchly face of another harpy.
Millie can watch you and tell me when it's ready. You waved to her from the far side.
Correct. Jumper ran to the cliff opening and disappeared. There was an outcry from the harpies outside. They had never seen a jumping spider this size before, and were amazed and frightened. He's waving, Millie cried. That had been quick. Dor made a last poke at the harpies, whirled, grabbed her with his left arm, and flung himself out over the cliff. Then he remembered. He still had the sword in his right hand. He had forgotten to hang on to the line. They plummeted toward the bottom of the chasm. Millie screamed and kicked her feet, and her hair smacked Dor's face. Then, with a wrench, the line drew taut. He didn't need to hold on. Jumper had attached the cable to him and tied the other end to the center of the transchasm cable. Once more, the spider's mature foresight had saved him. Now Dor surmised when the attachment had been made, he had been distracted by the encroaching harpies and had not noticed. They were swinging down and across the chasm, bouncing slightly. The harpies were milling about, screaming, but not doing anything effective. They saw his waving sword. Across they swung, grandly, almost colliding with the far wall. Jumper had kept the line short so they would not crash, but it was so close that Dor had to put his feet out and break against the cliff momentarily. Then they were swinging back and forth again in lessening arcs. As they came to rest, they were suspended about halfway down the depth of the chasm. The harpies were beginning to organize, trying to catch Dor and Millie in their claws, as they had before. But Dor had his sword out this time, and that made the difference. He waved it threateningly, and the harpies stayed just clear, screaming imprecations and losing feathers to the flashing tip of his weapon. It was hard for the dirty birds to match velocities with him because of the swinging and bouncing. They were not, however, about to give up the pursuit. Jumper, on the far side of the chasm, levered the line in the manner only he could do, and Dor and Millie descended. The rage of the harpies increased as the range increased.
"Don't let them get to the bottom," one cried. "The enemy is there."
That hardly reassured Dor. What good would it be escaping one menace only to fall into the clutches of another? Well, he would have to worry about that in due course. At least the harpies hadn't thought to cut the transchasm cable. Or if they had thought, they had rejected the notion. They didn't want to kill Dor, for then he would certainly be useless to them, and Millie might not taste as good scraped up from the floor of the... But enough of such thoughts. Now the base of the chasm was close. It was rocky and narrow and curvy, with holes and ridges. There seemed to be no way out, though this was uncertain since it twined out of sight in either direction. As they swung lower, their orientation shifted, thanks to Jumper's maneuvering of the lines, so that now they were traveling along the cleft rather than across it. The harpies became more desperate.
"Keep them away from the ground,"
the oldest and ugliest crone screeched.
"Grab them, snatch them, lift them. Drop the girl if you have to. We don't really need her. But save that buck."
Dor swung his sword in increasingly desperate arcs, keeping them at bay, trying not to sever his own line. A talon lanced into his shoulder from behind, and great foul wings beat about his head. Millie screamed loudly and kicked her feet harder. Her hair formed a golden splay in a passing sunbeam. None of that helped. Dor aimed his sword up and thrust violently over his own head and down behind it. The point jammed into something. There was an ear-shattering scream that momentarily drowned out Millie's racket, and the talon released his shoulder. When he yanked the sword forward, there was blood on the tip. He slashed in another circle, slicing feathers off the harpies in front. This violence sickened him, as it had when he fought the goblin band, but he kept on. Suddenly the line dropped. Millie emitted a truly classic eek as they fell, but the drop was very short. The mighty muscles and sinews of Dor's legs flexed expertly, breaking his fall, preserving his balance. He still had Millie. Now he set her down gently. Her skirt and bodice had separated. Dor stared briefly, not realizing that they were different pieces, and she tucked them together self-consciously. At least she had stopped screaming. A greenish shape dropped down beside them. "Sorry about that drop," Jumper chittered. "The harpies attacked me, and I had to move."
"Quite all right," Dor said. "You got us out of the harpy caves."
The harpies were still milling in the chasm, but no longer attacking. Jumper had plunged through them by surprise, using his dragline to break at the last moment so he hadn't been hurt. What a marvelous thing that dragline was. "Why are the harpies staying clear?" It was a stupid question like that. So many of its kind was not stupid after all. The harpies were raucous, ugly, and evil-smelling, except for Helen, but not notably cowardly. Why were they afraid of this rocky path?
"One of them said something about the enemy down here,"
Dor said, remembering. Millie screamed and pointed. Charging along the crevice path was a contingent of goblins, no sooner feared than realized.
"I can hold them off,"
Dor said, striding forward with his sword leading. He didn't know whether this was his body's impulse or his own, but it was a fact that heroism had greatly facilitated by this powerful and well-coordinated physique. He knew it could devastate the little goblins, so he could afford to be bold. In his own 12-year-old sized body, he would have been justifiably hesitant and been thought a coward.
I will lead the way out, Jumper chittered. Perhaps there will be a slope I can enable you to climb, anchored by my lines. You can serve as rear guard.
They moved east, Door walking backward so as to face the goblins without getting separated from his party. Obviously, there would be no escape toward the goblin caves.
"It's just a small band,"
A harpy screeched.
"We can handle them. Wipe them out, hens."
Suddenly, the harpies were plummeting toward the goblins. There was an instant melee, punctuated by cries, screeches, groans, and rages. A cloud of feathers formed. Door craned to see what was happening, but the dust stirred up to obscure it. They seemed to be fighting claw to nail, and it was not at all gentle.
Trouble ahead,
Jumper chittered, and Millie screamed. Door glanced there and saw more goblins charging from the west, a larger band. The spider stood to fight, though he could easily have jumped clear and clung to the cliff wall, saving himself, except that he would not desert his friends. To no avail. The horde quickly overran him. Millie's piercing screams did not help her. A dozen goblin hands grasped her flailing arms and kicking feet and swirling tresses. Door whirled to help, but was already too late. Goblins grabbed him everywhere and bore him to the ground. He tried to kick his feet, but they were weighed by sheer mass of goblin. Just like that, they had been captured by the enemy. All three of them were borne rapidly eastward, helpless. Suddenly, a cave opened in the chasm wall, and the goblin band charged inside. It was dark here, and cool. Door had the impression of descent, but couldn't be sure. In due course, they were brought to a room lit by guttering torches. This amazed Door, for in his day, goblins were desperately afraid of fire. But in his day, goblins did not go abroad by day, either. In fact, there were very few on the surface of Xanth at all, so this was another thing that had changed in 8 centuries. At one end of the chamber was a throne fashioned from a massive complex of stalagmites. It looked as if stone had run like hot wax, making layers and colored trails over itself until the whole had melded into this single twisted yet beautiful mass. An especially fierce-looking goblin bestrode it, his gnarled black legs almost merging with the stone.
"Well, trespassers,"
the goblin chief cried angrily,
"what made you suppose you could intrude on our domain with impunity?"
Millie was quietly screaming and still trying to kick her feet. She didn't like the goblin's mottled hands on her legs. The goblins, however, seemed more interested than antipathetic. Jumper was chittering, but Door knew the goblins could not comprehend that. So he stepped forward, breaking free of those who restrained him.
"We did not mean to intrude, sir," he said. "We were only trying to escape the harpies."
He had little hope of mercy from these monsters, but had to try. The goblin's dusky brows lifted in astonishment.
"You, a man, call a goblin sir?"
"Well, if you'll tell me your proper title, I'll use it,"
Door said nervously, though he tried to keep up a moderately bold front. Somewhere along the way his sword had been wrenched from his hand, and he felt naked without it.
"I am Sub-Chief Craven of the Chasm clan of goblins," the chief said. "However, sir will do nicely for an address."
Several goblins snickered. It was Craven, not Door, who reacted to that derisive mirth.
"You find the notion of sir humorous?"
he demanded of them furiously.
"This is no hero man, but an impostor who knows not of honor or combat,"
another goblin retorted.
"His sir is so worthless as to be an insult." "Oh, yeah?"
Craven cried.
"We'll verify that, Cruel. Will you meet him in honor challenge?"
Drool examined Dor, somewhat taken aback. But now the laughter of the clan was turning on him.
A single goblin does not meet a single human, even an impostor. The normal ratio is 4 or 5 to 1. Then bring on your henchmen,
Craven cried. He turned to the guards at the other side of the hall.
Return to this man-warrior his sword. We shall discover whether his sir is valid.
What a devious and wonderful thing was pride, Dor thought. Now the sub-chief was rooting for the captive to prevail against the goblin kind. 2 goblins dashed up, carrying Dor's sword and lifting the hilt for him to take. He was glad to have it back, but did not like the prospective combat. He had not been at all pleased about the goblin killing he had done before, and that misgiving grew as he observed how similar to his own kind these creatures were. They looked different, but their pride was similar. The goblins gave him no choice. They cleared a disc in the center of the cavern, and the 5 goblins of Drool's clan came at him. They were armed with small clubs and sharp fragments of stone, and looked determined. They obviously intended to do him in if they got the chance. Dor's body took over. He strode toward the band, his blade swinging. The goblins threw themselves to the sides. Dor turned to the right, kicking one goblin so hard the creature scooted across a smooth rock to fetch up against a wall, his stone knife fragmenting. Dor whirled on the others, swinging his blade, and they scattered again. One further foray to clear the goblins sneaking in behind him. Dor caught the moving club on his blade and punched underneath it with his left fist. He scored on the goblin's head, the thing hard as a rock, driving the creature back, shaken. Suddenly, Dor stood alone in the circle. He had vanquished the band, thanks to the power and expertise of his body, and he hadn't killed a single goblin. That made him feel better. Could not make up for the 4 he had killed before, but it eased his guilt somewhat. Craven smiled grotesquely.
Now, is that a suitable sir, or is it not?
He demanded rhetorically.
Keep your sword, man. You have established your status. Come, you and your party are my guests.
Jumper chittered. It seems goblins set great store by status, the web translated. You were very clever to utter that mark of respect. Dor was abashed.
I just thought that was what you said to a chief.
It seems you were correct. The captivity had, by this miracle of courtesy, become a visit. The goblin chief treated them to a sumptuous meal of candied cave lice, sugared slugs, and censored centipedes. Jumper pronounced it excellent. Dor and Millie weren't so sure.
So you were fighting the horrendous harpies,
Craven said, making conversation as he politely ripped several segments from a large centipede with his big yellow teeth and strained out the legs through the gap between teeth. He had seemed a bit wary of Jumper at first, but after appreciating the way the spiders' chalice, which were the big nippers, where another creature's jaws would be crushed the food, Craven seemed quite satisfied. The crunching was even more vicious than that of the goblins, therefore better table manners. Then, when the spider secreted digestive liquid that dissolved the delicacies into goo and sucked that into his stomach, the goblins had to applaud. They had never been able to eat like that.
Good thing we rescued you,
the goblin chief said, during a respite from his own attempt to emulate Jumper's mode of feasting. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to dissolve his food with his saliva before swallowing it.
Yes,
Dor agreed. Actually, the slugs weren't bad, the flesh being spongy and juicy, and Millie was getting the hang of the lice. She chewed them and spat out the fibrous legs in approved goblin fashion, somehow making it seem dainty. The banquet table was littered with legs.
Why were they after you?
Craven said.
We came out because we heard the commotion. and brought you in because any enemy of the harpies may be a friend of ours.
They wanted. Dor was not sure how to express it. They wanted me to do something for Heavenly Helen Harpy.
Heavenly Helen?
Millie inquired, her brow furrowing suspiciously. Craven laughed so hard he sprayed centipede legs on the cavern ceiling. The goblin courtiers applauded the marksmanship.
Heavenly Helen. So that's how they do it. Grabbing human males for studs. No wonder you fought them off. What a horrible fate.
Oh, I don't know. Dor began, then caught Millie's look. He shifted the subject. They said it was all because of you goblins, that you stole away their men.
We were just getting even for what they did to us,
Craven said.
Once we shared caves, but they were greedy for our space, so they wreaked a foul enchantment on us. They blighted the sight of our females so that they perceived the merits of our men in reverse. The boldest, bravest, handsomest, brightest goblins became anathema to them. They were drawn infallibly to the weakest, ugliest, stupidest cowards and thieves among us, and with those they mated. In this manner our whole species was inevitably degraded. We were once more handsome than the elves, and smarter than the gnomes, and stronger than the trolls, and had more honor than the men themselves. And now look at us, warped and gnarled and stupid and cowardly and given to treachery, so that 5 of us cannot threaten one of you. The harpies set that enchantment on us, and only they can lift it. And the vile birds refuse to do that. So we must seek whatever vengeance we can, while we yet retain some power in Xanth.
This was a side of the story the harpies hadn't told. Dor realized that peace was impossible, for there was no way to undo the damage done to the harpies, unless there could be an original mating between human and vulture to produce a male harpy. But he could hardly imagine any person or bird doing that. So the goblin-harpy war would continue until...
But we will have the final chortle,
Craven said with grim satisfaction.
Already the clans of goblins are massing, augmented by our brothers of the deep caverns, numberless in number, and by our allies of similar species. We shall extirpate the harpies and their ilk from the face of Xanth.
Dor remembered how the harpies were also massing their winged forces for the final battle. That would be some engagement. The honored visitors were given a fine dark cave for the night, with healthy rats to fend off the nickelpedes, and a vent in the ceiling through which the dark air rose. They were guests, yet there was something about the firmness of their hosts that gave Dor disquieting pause. He recalled Craven's remarks about the nature of goblins, their propensity for treachery. Were they so eager to practice their low arts that, rather than kill prisoners outright, they preferred to pretend they were honored guests who could then be betrayed? Did the goblins really intend to set them free, or were they merely fattening up fresh meat for their repasts? Craven, by his own statement, could hardly be trusted. Dor exchanged glances with Jumper's largest eyes. No words were exchanged, for the goblins could be listening through holes in the walls. But it was evident the spider had similar misgivings. "Make loud snoring sounds," Dor murmured to the floor where he lay in the dark. The floor obliged, and soon all other sounds were drowned out by the rasps, groans, and wheezes of supposed sleep. Under that cover, Dor held a whispered conference with his friends. So at night, it was hard to tell the time of day down here, but Jumper had an excellent sense of time. They set about sneaking out. The goblins had not realized the potential of the giant spider, since Jumper had stood to fight instead of jumping clear. Thus Craven had not set guards in the ceiling aperture. Actually, the guards really were rather stupid, as the sub-chief had said. Jumper jumped to the ceiling, clung there, walked into the ventilator hole, and explored where it led. Soon he was able to hoist Dor and Millie up. They wound their way through the darkness as silently as possible, while the raucous snores faded in the distance. At length, the length of a silken guideline, they emerged at the starlit surface. It had been surprisingly simple. Dor knew it would have been impossibly difficult had Jumper not been with them. Jumper, with his superlative night vision, his silken lines, and his scaling ability. The spider made the impossible possible. All right, everybody. And that is the end of chapter 4, which also means it is the end of our reading for this evening. We made it after 4 chapters. We're 40% of the way through the book. Hot diggity. Hope you guys have been enjoying Castle Roogna, Book 3 of the Xanth series. I will, of course, have these 2 chapters posted to my YouTube channel a little bit later this evening. So that way, if you missed any of it, you can certainly go back and have a listen. Hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful night. I should be back tomorrow with ideally Kingmaker. I think everybody is going to be there, and we should be playing the game. If for some reason, because I already know Altris is up in the air, his work may be giving issues, and if we lose another person, we won't be able to play. If not, we'll figure something else out. But, hopefully Kingmaker tomorrow. Thursday, Stompy Mech Night. Friday, Valentine's Day. This is your reminder, Valentine's Day. Friday. If you have not gotten your special somebody something, Friday, Valentine's Day. All right, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys all again really soon. Good night, all.